All right, let me know when we're good to go.
Well, we're still loading on our YouTube. All right, everyone, we're ready now.
All right, thank you so much. Good evening. Welcome to the board meeting dated August 15th, 2022. One moment, I'm going to pull up the meetings it appears we have two written statements and 9 public speakers. So Jesse, if you can get the public speakers ready.
Yes, we are letting them in batches right now. Do you want me to start there then?
Yes, please.
Okay. First up, we have Marianne Novella.
Hello all. My name is Marianne Novella, and I am here to speak on the special education program within Mmsd. I would like to highlight the poor consistency, lack of attention, and absolutely abysmal follow-through in regards to identified issues within the Mmsd special education program. I hope to open the blind eye that this administration has turned towards the nearly 4,000 students with IEPs and 504 plans within our district. Upon some digging into the recent history of our district's special education research goals and strategic framework, along with the current goals and statistics laid out by Mmsd, including the 2022 instruction work group, it's clear to see that the ball has absolutely been dropped for these students. Let's discuss the past 8 years or so of what has happened within special education. In 2014/15, Mmsd hires an outside agency to conduct research on special education practices. They also partnered with UW and held virtual and in-person parent, student, and community sessions. In 2016, Mmsd published its 2016 through 2019 special education plan. This plan outlines numerous and quite serious problems and a variety of strategies and modifications to teacher, administrative, and classroom policies in order to tackle these problems. The problems identified in this plan include, but are certainly not limited to, inconsistent and ineffective service delivery planning across the district, leading to significant gaps in access to general education curriculum, special education services, and/or general education environments. Significant levels of special education clustering in classrooms, in some classrooms finding the density of students with IEPs to be over 50%. Poor and inconsistent student transitions from grade to grade or to a new school. A lack of communication, collaboration, and classroom planning between the general education, special education staff, and administrative staff. Lack of district-wide professional development for all instructional staff on the principles and practices of inclusive education. Lack of family engagement and communication within the special education framework, leading to parents and caregivers feeling isolated and disparaged, and a lack of communication between parents, student services, and the central office. In 2017, a one-year review of this plan is published. No further reviews or data is ever made public from this plan. There's no further mention of the above identified issues in any future framework outlined by Mmsd. That brings us to today, when a 2022 instruction workgroup plan is published. This plan states its goal as ensuring every school will be a thriving school that prepares every student to graduate ready for college, career, and community, and identifies plan keywords as focus, creativity, racial equity, and social justice and belonging. Yet in this 48-page document, there is not a single mention of the words student services, special education, or IEP. In this 48-page plan, in this district, it's not hard to draw the conclusion that 4,000 students, 14% of the student population, has been forgotten. For a district that consistently focuses their messaging on inclusivity and social justice, the lack of attention to this student population and neurodiversity in general is quite alarming. These 4,000 students are among our most marginalized scholars within our district who depend on our board and administration to put their time, attention, and focus on their education. Today, I ask the Board of Education to shift their focus to these children and their families and to work towards a future where neurodiversity is celebrated and recognized at both the classroom and administrative level, to ensure that student services has a seat at every decision-making table, and to recognize the identified issues facing these students and teachers, working collaboratively to put forth effective and lasting solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Reverend Joseph B. Baring.
Good evening. My name is Joseph Baring. I'm a resident of Madison and a member of the board of Blacks for Political and Social Action of Dane County. I'm here this evening to support Dr. Jenkins and his administration. It has been said that excellence is achieved through well-doing. And for educational excellence to be realized, a clear set of practical, reinforced values and benefits must be the focus. This evening, I would like to applaud and show my support for Dr. Carlton Jenkins and his administration as they strive for educational excellence in the Madison Metropolitan School District. I applaud their efforts to improve the environment for learning, specifically with the addition of new playgrounds throughout the district and the implementation of better building maintenance and various building improvements. With shortages of qualified teachers across the country, I applaud their investment in our children's education by recruiting and hiring a more diverse staff of teachers, and then training these teachers to instruct our children using current best practices. And because educational excellence requires the whole village, I applaud Dr. Jenkins and his administration as they collaborate with community members with a focus on mental health and safety within our schools. And finally, I applaud the intentionality of Dr. Jenkins and his administration as they use an anti-racist lens in support of our children. I wholeheartedly support the direction in which Dr. Carlton Jenkins and his administration are leading the Madison Metropolitan School District. I thank you for this opportunity to voice my support of Dr. Jenkins and his staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ray Mendez.
Thank you. My name is Ray Mendez. You've heard from me before, and you're going to hear from me more and more parents too for years to come. The basic questions we've been asking that no one seems to be able to answer are to move forward, not to annoy you. Before I get to the meat of what I'm going to address, please let me thank Ali, Chris, Nikki, Laura, and Nancy for taking the time to meet with me. I think you found that I don't bite and I'm trying to make sense. I look forward to meeting with the rest of the board members and Dr. Jenkins soon. I appreciate the support, but I would like to meet with you, Dr. Jenkins. None of you, no one, not one of you can do what we're trying to do alone. We must align, however, under a clear vision. I don't see a clear vision. Today, I'm going to address the instructions work group document. That's item 5.1 in the agenda. This document is not an academic plan. I don't want to use the words that are in my head about that document. Neither do I want to use the words that are in my head about what is being called a strategic framework that has zero strategy. 14%, as Marianne just said, of your student population where disabled children have been left out of this document. No data, no goals, no plan, nothing. That 14% are the most vulnerable children in Madison. This is not a political issue. It's not about being woke or conservative, or supporting one person or destroying one person. It's not about being Republican or Democrat. I'm not fighting for religious freedom, gun control, or racial justice. We parents are fighting to keep our children and the families who are struggling to stay afloat. It's that simple. We got a problem in front of us. It's not political. Staff shortages and budgetary shortfalls are not an excuse. A lack of a shared purpose, clear vision, and a rational strategy that's missing is the problem. Parents, and if you listen carefully, many school staff members are absolutely fed up with the meaningless PR and legalese. The strategic framework and all the other PR uses the following words: commitment, excellence, belonging, social justice, voice, and focus. Who are you committed to? Who belongs? Who is excellence for? Who is social justice for? Whose voices are you listening to? Not the most vulnerable children in Madison. In the instruction work group that we studied over the weekend, there is zero data on the most vulnerable 14% of your students. Out of the 27,000 families in the district, you had 98 participate in feedback sessions to get data for this plan. Out of those 98, which is, by the way, 0.36% of the total student body, myself, along with some of the other parents you will hear from today, took part and vocalized concerns about issues within the special education program. Where is our voice in this document? How is it possible that we, the families of kids with IEPs, are still not given a voice with all those great words that are thrown out of belonging and focus? Here's what we are advocating for. We do have a solution. While this might be a mouthful, I would really appreciate you listening really carefully to what I'm suggesting. A district-wide program for inclusion and neurodiversity education. We're advocating for an evidence-based program, district-wide, to help make the MMSD community a better and well-educated environment for everyone. I repeat, a better place for everyone. This is not a zero-sum game. On a positive note, I'm committed. These parents that are voicing themselves more and more, we're willing to be a resource for you, whether that means being on committees, attending meetings, volunteering, gathering information, collecting data, whatever it takes. We can be an ally. We are not your enemy. Don't keep us out. You can't do this alone. We want to be a part of the solution and come to you with ideas to solve problems that you say you want to solve. So I'm asking you, Dr. Jenkins, Ali, again, thank you for meeting me, but I'd like to meet you all as a group. Dr. Jenkins, Ali, Carolyn Stanford Taylor, and Nancy, please meet with us parents as a unified group in the next 2 weeks. Just listen, let's get to know each other and understand where we're both coming from so we can have common ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Teresa Sanders.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Theresa Sanders, and I'm a longtime resident of Madison. Both of my sons attended Madison Public Schools, and they graduated from Madison Public Schools and went on to complete their college degrees. I'm here tonight to support the administration's budget for ensuring that our children, staff, and families are supported with the proper education and tools to teach our children. Specifically, I'm here to talk about training our teachers on how to teach our kids to read. One of the things that I'm always fascinated with, I can pull up at a drive-through such as McDonald's, and the kids in the car can read off McDonald's menu very quick. But when you put them in front of a book, their brains go dead. And so to me, that tells me that we need a better way to teach our children. Some of our children's parents send their kids to school to learn to read. Reading is not taught on a regular basis at home, so they're sending their kids to school to learn to read. So if that is going to be the case for some of our parents and children, then we must be better prepared to teach our kids to read. Reading, as all of you know, is fundamental to learning, finding jobs, doing anything in life. You must be able to read. If you're not able to read, you're not going to spend a very fruitful and gainful life. So I'm here to support any reading projects that are underway. Something that I would like to suggest as a reading initiative, when I was in college, since I was active in a lot of stuff, I would make sure that I get to the reading table in the evening so that I can catch up on all my homework or what was going on in the classroom, or even gossip by some professor that I had. So that may be something that the school district may want to try, is to have reading tables after school for those kids that are lacking with their reading skills. The second thing I'm here to talk about is the village builders. And I'm assuming the village builders are everyday people like myself coming to the schools and welcoming our students and families and teachers, a warm smile, and telling the students that they are there to learn, They're the best of the best. And they can always come to the village builder, which is that community person, if they have any problems. I am a great supporter of that. I spent years in the Madison Public Schools. My children, of course, my sons didn't like it when I showed up, but I didn't care because my purpose was to make sure that I was present in the school, saying hello to the other students, and also checking on my son to make sure that he was paying attention in his classroom. So I'm here to support both of those initiatives in Dr. Jenkins' budget. And I hope the school district board of directors would support those ideas also. That's it.
Thank you. Next, we have Jacqueline Hunt.
Thank you very much. As just stated, I'm Jacqueline Hunt. I'm a community auntie, grandma, mom, and member. I have had children in MMSD for over 20 years. I have raised my children and even watched my grandchildren enter into MMSD. Today, taking into consideration that we're coming out of a global pandemic and that none of us really have a point of reference for that, I want to give us some grace. But I also want to express my support for what the administration is doing to ensure that our schools have the proper support for our students, staff, and the families. The construction work our district is doing as part of the maintenance and the referendum, which is highlighted by over 40 new playgrounds, is making a better learning environment for our students and our staff. New curriculum, investing in new curriculum and materials for elementary reading is making sure that our children have access to updated knowledge and learning strategies. The work to train teachers how to teach reading using current best practices is building up our teachers to better work with all of our students. The hard work of recruiting staff is creating a more diverse staff, which is starting to better reflect the population of our students. Collaboration with community members around safety, mental health, wellness is a very welcomed approach towards building the district's capacity to help schools thrive. The ongoing expansion of the full day 4K is very timely and is a great investment in making sure all of our diverse communities of families can help their students have a great start educationally. The investment in village builders positions, like Teresa just stated, regular people such as myself, now that I don't have students attending classes anymore, will help the district grow a more diverse staff and presence in the schools, which is better able to engage our students from historically excluded groups. And this intentional focus on becoming an anti-racist district is showing our community that the district is authentic about standing up for all students and families. Now, I started off by saying that I have been a part of MMSD for over 20 years. I've raised and graduated 7 children from MMSD. And I just want to say that it had not all been all peaches and cream, but we made it through. Today, we're up against a lot of different things, technology being one, exposure to things that our kids probably didn't have exposure to when mine were coming up. We got to do better, and we can. And I support Dr. Jenkins and this administration and the changes that he's trying to bring. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Martha Ceravo.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Martha Ceravo. I'm here with Mantel Mamas and Disability Advocates. So good evening to all the board members, Dr. Jenkins, and everybody else who's here or listening in tonight. I also wanted to thank my peer advocates, Marianne and Ray, for attending and sharing their insights and perspectives with you, and anyone else who has previewed the workshop material for tonight. To start, I wanted to highlight the platform of a colleague of mine, Miss Wheelchair America 2022, Christina Burke, which says, "Put disability back in diversity." Now, with that in mind, as you navigate the presentation tonight, that's correct. As you navigate the presentation tonight, that'll be presented to you, please look for the representation of our special ed students. If someone finds it, please let me know. I don't want to hear that it's included or presumed to be part of the whole. It is funded with intention. It is implemented with intention. So why can't we include it in presentations like these with intention? If we're going to acknowledge disparities in other areas of academic learning, you should be acknowledging how special ed families and students have been affected to everyone as a whole. It is no wonder that our legislators don't understand special education struggles and how to connect about it in a nonpartisan manner when it's not included in presentations like what you're going to be viewing tonight. Obviously, it requires a very comprehensive discussion, and you might be diving into it more at a later date, but it should not be segregated all the time. You're missing several slides with it not being included and suggesting that thousands of students and families are essentially silenced in presentations here. General ed should know how special ed affects our district and how they collectively affect the budget and all the data that we have that we're given. Nancy Molfenter, our named Executive Director of Student Services, has the ability to be an administrative level special ed champion. Please stop underutilizing her insights when going through these. I know we have players here that can change the narrative and show MMSD what diversity and inclusion means to our disabled students and their communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Constance Miles.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I am Constance Miles and a member of the Black for Political Association of Dane County, such as Dr. Bering. And I am just here this evening to support Dr. Jenkins and his administration for all of the hard work that they have been doing. Just to kind of reiterate what Jackie said, the construction work that's part of the referendum, the new curriculum that they're having specifically focusing on elementary reading, the training that they're doing in terms of for teachers, using best practices, all of the work that's being done in recruiting staff, specifically a diverse staff, the collaboration with community members around safety and mental health and wellness, the expansion of the 4K. We've already talked about the village builders a couple of times this evening, and the focus on the district becoming an anti-racist district. I applaud Dr. Jenkins for all of his efforts and am asking for the school board to continue to support him and what he's trying to do to implement positive changes for the Madison School District. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Next, we have Sandra Brown.
Good evening, everyone. To all of my siblings, I'm Sandra Brown, and after 36 years of dedicated and passionate service as an elementary educator, followed by 6 years of mentoring new educators in the district, a parent, a substitute teacher, and currently working as an advocate for caregivers and scholars that have IEPs through the Student Services Department. So I'm not a new kid on the block. I come before you today to express my support for Dr. Jenkins and his administration and in doing what they're doing to ensure that our schools have the proper support for our scholars, our staff, and our families. The construction work our district is doing as a part of the maintenance approved by the public referendum which is highlighted by over 40 new playgrounds, is making a better and safe learning environment for our students and our staff. I love how they're spending time looking through and using the lens of diversity. The intentional focus on becoming an anti-racist district is showing our community that the district is authentic about standing up for all students and families. The hard work of recruiting staff is creating a more diverse staff, which is starting to better reflect our student population. I know Dr. Jenkins is dedicated to making continued strides in this area. The investment of the village builders position, which is one of several strategies of diversity, will help the district grow a more diverse staff, which is better able to engage our children from historically excluded groups. The reading. The investment in the new curriculum materials for elementary reading is making sure our teachers have access to updated knowledge and teaching strategies to enhance student learning. The work to train teachers how to teach reading using techniques prescribed by the science of reading is building up our teachers to better work with all of our students. The collaboration with community members around safety, mental health, and wellness is a community members is welcome, and wellness is a welcome approach towards building the district's capacity to help our schools thrive. The ongoing expansion of full day 4K is a timely investment in making sure all of our diverse community of families can help their students have a great start educationally. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. And Dr. Jenkins and your administration, please keep on keeping on. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Our last public speaker is Judith Fitzgerald.
Hi, thanks. There were some slides that I sent also to Jesse. Jesse, do you have those?
Yep, I'm working on it.
Okay, well, okay. I'm a community member that's very interested in literacy, and I applaud you changing to a curriculum, actually getting a curriculum that really should help our kids read. And this is kind of ground zero on this. And it is going to be very difficult for the teachers to make the transition to the science of reading and structured literacy approach. And I want to point the teachers and staff and the village elders to some sites that would be very helpful, that I've found very helpful to me on my literacy journey. The first one is Fulcrum. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with this site. This is by Kareem Weaver of Oakland NAACP, and Oakland is using EL, and they already have blazed the trail for you, and so has Detroit. And he's got very good things on his site that teachers can use instead of reinventing the wheel and coming up with a whole curriculum themselves. There's a lot on this site that could be used that they could access. And next slide, please. The other group that has over 165,000 Facebook members are teachers that want more information about the science of reading. And this can be for anybody too, can join this, but it's the science of reading, what I should have learned in college. This was started by a reading interventionist, Donna Hydmetic from Northern Wisconsin. And it has over 165,000 members. So that's pretty impressive. And next slide, please. The next group is the Reading League. And I can't tell you how much information they have. This is all free. And Dr. Jenkins, this doesn't even cost any money, these information sources, and they're actually quite good. The Reading League was largely funded by our own Pleasant Rowland. This is a national organization that has spread information about the science of reading and really has been key in the movement that has taken place over the last 2 or 3 years. So I just want to point some of these sites out to you to be supportive of what you're doing. So continue on. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Back to you, Sabian.
Thank you so much, Jesse. We also had 2 written statements. One, wanting to state the support for the administration that it's providing for students, staff, and families. And a second one highlighting item 4.1 in the instruction work group, wondering why there is not more of a specific focus on students with disabilities. And now moving on, I would like to approve the minutes dated May 9th, 2022. May I please get a second?
Second.
All right, and then Lavinia, your advisory vote?
Yep.
All those in favor? All right, motion carries 7-0. And just a note, as some of us are virtual, if you would like to put your hand up to get in the queue, please utilize the Zoom feature so I can see it right away. Thank you. And so now moving on to agenda item 4.1, the health services update.
Actually, I have a question and my hand is.
One moment, Nikki. We will get on with this, and then you can go when it's open for us after the presentation.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Carrie Stanfley. I'm the Director of Health Services. So our update tonight, overall, the cases for COVID in Dane County remain relatively stable, still at an elevated rate, just in the low 200s per 100,000 in cases. And we're seeing kind of similar rates for how many people and staff we have in the buildings at this time. So we've continued our case investigation all the way through summer. We are starting to see a slight increase in the number of hospitalizations, but the good news associated with that, we are not seeing an increase in the ICU admissions. So that is good news so far. One of the biggest changes that we're going to have for this next school year is our testing in schools program. So we are going to continue with the Department of Health Services testing in schools program. ACL will continue to be our vendor that does our testing for us. We are going to, right now we have 13 sites that are open this next week, offering testing to all of our MMSD staff and students. And then starting the week of the 22nd, we're hoping to open up 42 sites. Each of those sites are allowed to have 15 hours per week of testing. So that will equate to about 3 hours of testing at each site per day. The other big changes for this is the testing is now only for our MMSD staff and students. Last year, they had expanded it out so that families and community members could participate in that. And now it is just strictly MMSD staff and students that are able to access that testing. With that, they've also made some changes in regards to the type of testing that they're going to do and how they're going to do it. Last year, they dual swabbed everyone. So everyone got a swab for rapid antigen and PCR. And now they are just going to start with the rapid antigen test. And then in certain conditions, they will do a confirmatory PCR test for that. So lots of changes happening with our testing in schools program, but I'm really happy that it's able to continue this year and that we'll get support from our ACL testing vendor. It just is not going to be to the level that we have had last year with our sites basically being open all day. We are looking at our school health services staff once again stepping in to try to fill that gap. And planning for at this time that we would be able to offer rapid antigen testing on the off hours when our ACL testing vendor is not on site. So we are currently working with that plan as well. We also did sign up for a home rapid antigen testing kit program that the DHS was supposed to be starting, but we haven't gotten any communication as to what that program will look like yet. So we are still exploring all our opportunities for next year in regards to testing. In regards to vaccination, we are continuing our partnership with the Public Health Madison Dane County, looking at potentially continuing our pop-up vaccination clinics associated with our food pantry sites and locations. And we're also working with SSM Health to really look at what can we do for vaccination this fall for our students as well. So we continue to encourage everyone to get vaccinated and to get boosted if they are eligible for that. In regards to COVID mitigation strategies, this has been another tough start to the school year because CDC just released on Friday their updated school guidance. We're expecting DHS to probably release theirs sometime this week. Thankfully, our colleagues at DPI did send out some guidance at the end of July, so we were able to start having these conversations. So we, our team is quickly reviewing and digesting and trying to make sure that our measures are kind of in alignment with what the CDC has just released from Friday. So more work to come on that. But what we do know is we've learned a lot with COVID, and there's a lot of things that we know are really good to keep our schools healthy and safe. And so we're going to continue those indefinitely. Those would include encouraging people to stay home when they're sick, encouraging people to get vaccinated, not only for COVID, but all of our recommended vaccines. One of the things that happened with COVID is people got behind on their well child exams or their annual physicals, and everyone is kind of behind on their routine immunizations. And so you may have seen in the news, there was a little polio outbreak in New York City, and that was stemmed from children and people being behind kind of on their routine vaccination. So we're going to continue our work on that. Hand hygiene, so we'll still be encouraging everyone to perform hand hygiene when they enter into our buildings and before they eat any snack or at lunchtime, and then any other times as well. And then continuing the great work that our building services team is doing in regards to the daily cleaning that they're doing and their enhanced ventilation that they've done for our schools as well. So we're going to continue those because we know those are really good for to have a healthy environment. And so the other thing we'll look at is with masking. We know that we are going to have people masked in our buildings for lots of different reasons at different times. So there still is the requirement for people to mask on days 6 through 10 of their isolation period. And one of the other things, we really want to encourage people to stay at school if they're able to. So if they're having respiratory symptoms and say they're not really severe and they feel well enough to be at school and they want to stay at school, we would just ask that they mask while they're having those respiratory symptoms, and they'd be able to stay at school as long as their COVID test is negative. So we will have some component of masking all the way through, and that will kind of ebb and flow too with what is recommended from our community members. So like I said, we will be reviewing all of the guidance, and we're really looking at kind of our launching off to a good year with this. So quickly digesting all of that information and getting our lesson plans updated and prepared for staff and students. So we're working on those this week and onboarding our COVID response teams that we've built with different types of medical professionals leading that with our contact tracers, so we can still do our case investigation and make sure that all of our staff and students and families know when it's safe for people to return to school and how to access testing as well as treatment options for our families. And then thinking about our professional development. So we have a full day of training scheduled for all of our health services staff on the first day of school. So on Wednesday, the 24th, we will have a full day of on-site training for our health services team members. And part of that day will be spent just reviewing and updating the COVID recommendations. So we are excited for that. And one additional thing, we also did put forth and develop a monkeypox guideline for MMSD. That's kind of been a buzzword lately, although it's not something that we're overly concerned about yet, but we wanted to be prepared. And so that has been approved by our local public health department as well as our medical director. So in regards to monkeypox, we do have a guideline available for our health services staff to be able to give guidance around monkeypox. And that is it.
All right, thank you so much, Nurse Carey. In the hand queue, I see Board Member Vandermillen, followed by Dr. Jenkins.
Yes, Nurse Carey. My question is, has the medical team made the decision formally for the school year over masks? Have we announced that yet? As I keep getting a lot of emails on that. This is my first question. And then I have one comment after, if that's acceptable.
Yeah, so right now we are still in a mask recommended, highly recommended state. We do also recognize that that may change based upon what's happening with our local COVID rates and our community conditions. I believe we're working on communications to be sent out hopefully tomorrow or later this week.
Appreciate that. And my other comment is general comment for admin on topic 5.1. I was disappointed not to see special education. I'd like to know the current test scores and the current graduation rates of disabled students. I especially would like to know the current graduation rates of Black, Brown, and Native American disabled students, as I feel that they may not be getting the same services. And I seriously worry that we are providing an educational system that is meeting their needs. And I feel that we cannot be an anti-racist district if we are being an ableist district. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Board Member Vandermillen. And just a general comment, the information data we're getting tonight is a snapshot related specifically to literacy and climate and culture. The full data package will be available to us and the public at the August 27th board retreat. So more to come. Dr. Jenkins, followed by Board Member Simpkin.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for that response, Chair Castro, because we are going to be coming back with that information that Board Member asked about. I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to our board and to our medical advisors and to Nurse Carey for continuing to be great stewards as we've gone through, going through this pandemic in a way that's maintaining the safety of everyone, following CDC, following our state, following our local public health. We are all in this together. We've been meeting in the summer, and yes, so that we can signal very early. And you heard Nurse Carey say, we're still in the mask recommended. She mentioned, I want to reinforce, after testing positive, days 6 through 10, that's the only time we mask mandate. But we're going to continue to meet with our medical advisors, take all of the best of advice that's coming from our medical team and also from CDC, the state and local public health. But Nurse Carey, thank you so much. She's one of our parents as well. She stepped in and she has been a great steward for our entire district and great example. So I just want to publicly say thank you for all you've done.
Thank you. Board Member Simpkin.
Thank you. Carrie, I appreciate all of the thoughtfulness that has gone into the COVID response to MMSD. And I'm wondering now, with masks being optional, if you have collected any data or done any outreach to both staff and to students who might be medically fragile or for whom this then may make in-person school no longer a safe option. And if we have, I'm wondering if you have any data on that and what options we are providing to them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first, I just want to make sure we're all using the same language. Like, we are strongly recommending masking for everyone indoors. So we're not using an optional type language. Like, we are still strongly encouraging everyone to mask while they're inside the spaces. And I think for our children that have medical complexity, that's really being looked at an individual level and trying to make the best plan possible for those students. So a lot of that will be meetings at start of the school year to try to plan for those students and what it is particularly that they need in regards to their plans of care and what the recommendations are of their medical staff in regards to how they should be receiving their education for this next school year.
Thank you.
Board Member Gomez-Schmidt.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Carrie, and to the health services team for the work that has gone into creating these guidelines. I know it's been frustrating waiting for guidance to come out from Department of Public Health as they were waiting for CDC guidance. So knowing that this is a continuing conversation and we are going to be updating these and continuing to talk about this as we move forward. So I do appreciate that. And I would like to see some more robust guidance from our state and from our local health department, if that is possible, to join the conversation. So one of the questions I had, and it was in the update that you gave us in preparation for this board meeting, it talked about schools maybe taking some of the strategies that they used during COVID and that they found worked for other reasons and keeping those in place for this school year. My question is how is that going to be communicated to families about why some schools are doing certain things and some schools aren't? Because what I heard in the spring is that there was there was a lot of questions about why some schools had decided to go back to eating in the cafeteria and some didn't, why some schools were still cohorting students on the playground pretty tightly and other schools weren't. And so recognizing that our schools are very different, I'm thinking elementary specifically here. I guess I should clarify that. I'm talking about our elementary schools. Knowing that we have 32 elementary schools, and in a lot of cases, the size of their spaces, physical spaces and outdoor spaces are different. But my question again is, how are we going to communicate that with parents about what schools are going to be doing and why?
Yeah, we just had our Leadership Institute last week, and we spoke to the principals and administrators in regards to that with, being able to clearly communicate that while cohorting, distancing, all those other things are not, in regards to COVID, and really being able to communicate out to our community as to why that particular school is choosing to continue with such a strategy and what the purpose is behind that. So that really should fall out on each local school to be able to communicate that out to their families. And we would encourage the families that if they have those questions to reach out to their building administration as well.
Yeah, I would be really interested, again, since each one of us is assigned to a number of schools, I'd be really interested in, the schools that I'm working with to understand what guidance is going to go into place and what practices. And then I'm also wondering, are our assistant superintendents going to be, or associate superintendents at each school level going to be doing building walkthroughs to kind of, I guess, one of my just cautions or concerns is we don't want decisions to be made based on perception of safety or other things like that. We want to be based on some objective criteria that schools are using and whatever, parameters they're using to decide what's useful going forward and what needs to change. So I guess the question is, I'm sorry, that was a lot all in one sentence. The question is, are there walkthroughs happening with the assistant superintendents before a school starts up, or how is that being orchestrated?
Most definitely the associate soups. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, most definitely all of our associate soups are going to be walking through buildings, but they're also meeting with the principals of the various schools. We did just have the Institute. And what I'm going to do is have the associate soups come back with you, and we'll talk about some of those nuances. There were some good things that happened during COVID as well that we learned as some good strategies, and then individualized in certain buildings and certain classrooms. So we'll want to come back and calibrate on it and be able to share it out with all the board members, in particular in the buildings that you're supervising. You'll know where they are in terms when you walk in, what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so I'll get back with the associate soups, and we'll come back and just respond to all the board here.
Okay. Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Board Member Muldrow, followed by Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you so much, Board Member Castro. I want to start by thanking you, Nurse Carey, for all the work you all have done over the course of this summer to make sure that our summer school students could have a great time at school, as well as, you know, be safe and prevent the spread of COVID. I want to ask first about vaccination. Our youngest learners, part of our commitment to masking last year was that throughout the vast majority of last year, our youngest learners were not eligible for vaccination. As younger and younger kids become eligible for vaccination, what are we doing to support our students in 4K in getting vaccinated?
Yeah, so we are leaning heavily on our partners. We really need to have a partner to be able to hold vaccine clinics at our schools and at our locations. And so we are working on that. But again, all of the information that goes out and on our website is really encouraging everyone to be able to access those vaccines. You can get them oftentimes. It depends on the age of the student. Some of our local pharmacies and even our community providers are really encouraging those with younger children to really get that vaccine at their primary care provider's location for safety reasons and for the ease of administration. And as you know, the younger kids oftentimes need a little extra hold and privacy to be able to give that vaccine. And so a lot of our community sites, obviously a pop-up tent outside is probably not the best developmentally appropriate place for that child to receive that vaccine. So, you know, really leaning on the parents knowing their children the best and where the right site for them, for their child to get vaccinated is, and that will encourage, you know, and help them access whatever site that might be. So a lot of our community providers are not even offering vaccines to the younger age group.
For our parents who maybe don't have health insurance, are struggling with transportation or scheduling, or really having a hard time, you know, in engaging with getting a vaccine for their kid. I know the dosage is really specific for younger children. Is MMSD positioned to support those families?
So at this time, we don't have a clinic specifically for those kids. So it would be referring our families to our community sites. And so those would be through our public health department and other community sites that are administering vaccines to that age group. But again, even if they are without health insurance, there are other locations and services that we have for those families that we can refer them to for their vaccines.
Ms. Carey, do you know what percentage of our students will start the school year vaccinated roughly?
So we do not, it is not a mandated vaccine through the state. And so, you know, we will get that information as parents give us permission to be able to get that information in regards to where, but that will all come kind of with our enrollment data, but we don't specifically keep that record as it is not a school required vaccination.
Nurse Carey, as you become more aware of that specific data around COVID vaccines through our enrollment data, can you follow up with the board and kind of gauge where our student body is currently at?
Yeah, I can say just in national trends, what I will tell you, every age group, every time they opened up a new age group for vaccines, it did decrease. So like we had a very big uptake for our 12 and older population, and then it decreased down to about 50 to 60% in regards to the 5 and older when that was out. And what I'm seeing and reading on the national trend data is that we're seeing that trend to kind of continue with that younger population. And so, you know, we really follow those trends pretty closely in light of what our families are doing. Although we do have a high rate of vaccination in Dane County, it does decrease as the age groups kind of go down. So I'm expecting that would be my expectation of what our data would look like.
Well, it would be great to be pleasantly surprised in terms of our data around young people. And I look forward to hearing from you when we have, data based on our enrollment information, because vaccination is such a normalized part of sending your kids to school. My last questions are about masking. We had a parent reach out to us via email this afternoon saying that their child is at a high risk for a really adverse impact from having COVID because they recently had heart surgery. And I think, for our parents who are navigating something as complex as that, our approach to masking is really important. And so I want to ask this parent's question pretty exactly. I'm going to refer to the email. This parent asked, why are we not requiring masking when our community is at a high threshold for the spread of COVID, and then highly recommending it when we are in a more medium or low level space? Can you explain kind of our thinking around that?
Yeah, so I would say it just happened recently that we went into high community transmission risk. We've been sitting in the medium transmission risk for quite some time. Then we had about a week or a week and a half period where we kind of flipped over to the high community transmission risk. And then we went back to medium, and it's just a kind of hot off the press that we just flipped back into that high community transmission risk. And so we've kind of been on that threshold kind of all along with that. So we're following the data really closely to try to see what we're looking at for trends to make that. I think what my recommendation would be for any student that has complex medical conditions is to have that conversation with your medical provider of what specific accommodations and safety mitigation measures that people should do to protect themselves in regards to COVID-19. That is the most important thing, because it really is individualized for each individual person.
I very much appreciate that you've spoken to trends quite a few times. One of the trends that many of us have observed is when you say masking strongly recommended, it is interpreted as masking optional. And that is a trend that people are very aware of and quite sensitive to, especially people who are adversely impacted by COVID or autoimmune compromised. So really talking about the language and the effectiveness of the language of highly recommended versus mandatory masking. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I have tried to really make sure that we're using clear language, because I believe there is a difference between masking optional and highly recommended. And we're following really what the recommendations are with the guidance from our local public health department to really making sure that we're using similar language. And so even in a medium community transmission risks, while it's not part of the strategies that CDC puts up forth, we have always maintained the stance that we are strongly encouraging everyone to mask indoors where appropriate. So I have always used the language of strongly recommended, and I've tried to correct people when they use masking as optional, because I see them as two very different words.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. I do want to say I respect the nuance in terms of the language, and I think there is a difference between what we're saying and how people are interacting with what we're saying. And that's really what I wanted to draw our attention to, and I think we need to be very aware of as we move forward. Thank you so much, Board Member Castro. That's it for my questions.
Thank you. And Board Member Simkin.
I have just a couple of follow-ups, both to President Wolf's comments and to my question from before. I am wondering if it's possible to collect, even informally, some data on actual mask usage using this language. So whether it's just a quick survey to teachers, I I would actually think that the mask highly recommended is going to lead to a pretty low number of students masking. And so I'd like to know what that looks like in reality. I'm also wondering about collecting data around students or staff that are not able to attend school because of the mask highly recommended change. I think it would be good for the school board to just have those numbers in hand and know how many students and how many staff are needing accommodations because of that. Is that possible to get that information?
I think we will be able to get the information in regards to people seeking accommodations. And I would assume all of the staff accommodations comes through HR. So I would not be able to speak to those.
And I don't know if it's possible to do like a quick Google survey or something, and that might not be you, that might be through somebody else, but just to see what the actual mask usage percentage is in the classrooms with this different language. I think that would be really good for us to know the impact of that language.
Yeah, board members, Simpkin and all the board members, we do have our summer school that we can speak to as well, because it was the same thing in terms of mask recommended. And Nurse Carrie, if you want to speak to that, or any of the associate soups, if you would take this time to share back with me.
Yeah, so we informally kind of did a walkthrough in regards to mask wearing, and we saw anywhere from 5% up to 70% of people that were wearing masks. And there was a strong correlation with if staff were wearing masks, then the students were wearing masks. So if 70% of staff were wearing masks, about 70% of the students were wearing masks. If there was a low percentage of staff that were wearing masks, then there was a low percentage of students that were wearing masks. Is kind of the general gist of what we saw over summer.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that gives us an idea of what the impact could be.
Thank you so much, Board Member Simpkin. Before we move on, Lavinia, did you have any questions or comments?
I think my only comments were, or questions were, how are you going to deal with people that interpret this language differently? And will this strongly recommended language be taught to students at the beginning of the school year by email or through teachers and staff? And I'm just wondering how you'll deal with that.
Yeah, so we are currently reviewing all of our educational materials. So we're redoing our staff training and we're reviewing our lessons in regards to masking. And thankfully, there won't be a lot of update in regards to the mask updates for students, because we really wanted to make that kind of a mute issue, that people are going to wear masks and some people might not be wearing masks, and that we are not going to judge, bully, or criticize anyone for what their choices are in regards to that, knowing that we're always going to have people in our buildings that are going to be required to mask because of certain situations. And that information is private and protected information, and that isn't for others to know why people are wearing masks at any one certain time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you so much, Nurse Carrie. I certainly admire and appreciate your work in an environment that is uncertain and unpredictable, with some guidances released on Friday evening. So definitely appreciate your work and dedication to our district.
Thank you.
Yes, moving on to 5.1, we're going to look at some of the data relevant to our strategic framework. And just a reminder to ground ourselves that behind every number and figure we see is a person or a student, and that no one's learning journey is linear. But nevertheless, it is important to capture where we're at. And so I will hand it off to our Associate Superintendent, Cindy Green.
Thank you so much, Board Member Castro, and good evening, everyone. Jesse, thank you for sharing your screen. Just a different set of slides. Yep.
Yeah.
While Jesse is getting the slides set up, I will just frame for us this evening that we have a few topics that we're really excited to spend time with you on. We will stop at the end of each topic to allow time for discussion and for board questions. Jesse, could you please go to the next slide? Again, our district vision that every school will be a thriving school and ensuring that we're preparing every student to graduate for college, career, and community. Tonight, you will actually see a glimpse into how we measure our goals aligned to our strategic framework metrics. And so we will talk a little bit about this tonight, as well as about how we're recalibrating around these goals as we go into this upcoming school year. This slide represents our core values that we try to not only just utilize in spaces, but really live by in the decisions we make and in the work that we do. And so tonight we are going to get our first glimpse into our end of year reporting. I want to make sure that I frame and that everyone understands that this is just a preview to small bits of our data, and that at the end of this month, as we go into our board retreat and our regular board meeting, you will be able to have full access into the comprehensive set of data that we use to see our progress towards meeting our 3 strategic goals. We will also look at the data that we have collected so far from our input sessions around strategic framework recalibration, and also share with you our next steps around that work as we have just gotten started with that. And last, we'll do an overview of our academic and language assessments for the upcoming school year. So I am going to introduce Bree Monahan and Beth Vade. I'm not sure if Beth is on also, but I know Bree is. Bree is in our research and innovation team, and Bree is going to spend some time walking through a preview of the data we have to share for you tonight. You go to the next slide, Jesse, and could you go to one more slide? Okay, I am going to turn it over to Bree.
All right. Thanks, Cindy. So as Cindy introduced, my name is Bree. I am our research director in the Research and Innovation Office. And tonight we're going to give sort of an overview, a preview of some of the data that's aligned to the strategic framework. We're really focusing in on those literacy and culture and climate metrics. And I want to emphasize just one more time that we know that this is a not a comprehensive look, and that we'll get to that in that board meeting at the end of the month. So the data that we're sharing tonight are some of those strategic framework metrics. And for those of you who've been around in the district for a while are aware of this as sort of our public accountability data set. It's the data that we look at the end of the year. It's the data that schools set goals around for their school improvement plans. And because that is how we use the data, we use a little bit of a different way of defining it than other kinds of data that you might see that teachers might use on a day-to-day basis. It's the data that allows us to look across our system at the end of the year using a common snapshot. So each of the metrics are aligned to one of those 3 goals of the strategic framework. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So as a district, we resume these standard routines around looking at data and reflecting on the prior school year. I think it's important to acknowledge that this 2021-22 school year was by no means a routine school year. We know that COVID-19 continued to have an adverse impact on the experiences of students, families, and staff. You know that people got sick, had to miss school. We know that people struggled with access to resources. We know that it was challenging for mental health. And we're going to see that in our data, and we're also going to see that in sort of the data itself and our ability to look backwards at the end of this year and understand exactly how what those trends can and cannot tell us. Specifically regarding our assessment data, we know that our statewide assessments were not administered in 2019-20, and then in the 2020-21 school year, we had very low participation. We were mostly virtual at that time still. So in looking at our results from this year, we're going to see sort of just a partial story of our district at this point in time. And then before getting into what we saw as results, we wanted to share sort of a frame for thinking about this data to drive improvement. Often with accountability data, I think it can become an exercise in compliance. We really want to make sure that we're using this and other data to learn and do everything with this data in service of improvement. So our team has done a lot of work in learning about the methodology of improvement science as articulated by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. So we wanted to call out 4 of their core principles of improvement, how we thought about them for thinking about this data, and what we shared with principals and school leaders for their own investigation of this data as well. So first, we want to make sure that we are seeing the system that produces our current outcomes. For us, that means we want to use different types of data to understand different parts of our system. We need to look backward to understand where we've been in order to plan where we're going. Second, we want to anchor our practice improvement in disciplined inquiry. This idea that routines matter, we're going to do this and build our muscle memory over time, iterate and learn and get better at it. Third, we want to accelerate improvement through networks. It's this idea that we all see different parts of our system. We learn more when we learn together. It's critical that we actually draw on the expertise of other people in our system. So as I get into sharing the results, I want to share that this has been a collaborative effort. Our research and innovation team has worked very closely with other central office departments to dig in and understand this data together. And then lastly, variation in performance is the core problem to address. It's this idea that when we see variation in our data, that's pointing us to inequitable experiences in our system that we need to investigate further and change. So digging deeper into one of those just for today, this idea that routines matter. We shared this with principals and school leaders last week at our Leadership Institute. It is the process for how we intend to share data this year. We're implementing quarterly reviews of progress where schools will review data, followed by the board and public release, with an internal review and production prior to sharing those data sets with schools. So we have those quarterly reviews of progress dates for schools November 9th, February 15th, and May 17th. All right, so getting into the results, I'm going to share 2 slides of just high level findings across all of the end of year data before getting into those specific literacy and culture and climate metrics. So what we learned first, that looking just at district level averages can obscure important variation in results at particular schools. We know that we have a wide range of schools in our 52 schools in MMSD, and we saw a lot of variation. So just looking at district level results is going to tell somewhat of an incomplete story. Second, the quality and reliability of some of the data that's been collected over the past few years reflects the challenges of the pandemic. So I spoke earlier about that no participation for statewide assessments in 2019-20 and low participation in 2020-21. In that year of low participation, we actually saw a higher percentage of students who had been proficient or advanced in the past on prior assessments be in that sample who took the test in that year. So what we'll see across assessments is from last year to this past year, a slight decrease, but we think they're not necessarily comparing to apples. We know that a higher percentage or a disproportionate number of students who had already been proficient were taking that test, and we underrepresented students who had not been proficient or advanced in prior years. Third, we saw that our focus on literacy may have helped buoy our proficiency results on state tests amid all of those challenges that we know occurred during the pandemic. But we're seeing a very different story when looking at mathematics results. And this is something that we are seeing across the country, where literacy is holding a little bit more steady and math is lagging. So we know that this was our first year of reopening schools for the full year since COVID hit. We know that that was a big focus of staff to welcome students back, relearn how to do school. And what we saw in looking at our culture and climate data is that students did report positive, somewhat nuanced feelings of belonging and safety at school. We have a climate survey instrument this year that has some new questions that help us understand what students are telling us when they talk about belonging and safety, including some level of dissonance between reporting really positive relationships with staff across the board and somewhat less positive responses about their relationships with students. So that is something that we are continuing to dig into to try to understand. Next, we saw that the 2021-22 school year stressed staff in MMSD and nationwide, particularly teachers. We did see lower staff climate survey results than we have in the past, although they're not apples to apples. And we also see declining staff retention. And this is all in line with national trends, not a unique MMSD challenge. And then lastly, we know in looking at our end of year data sets that as we emerge from the public health crisis, that MMSD's equity imperative persists. Those same groups of students who were insufficiently served by our system before COVID continue to face inequities in their experiences and in outcomes. And that is something that holds pretty much across our data. Go to the next slide. All right. So getting into some of the specific data elements related to literacy. So looking at forward for grades 3 through 5, we did see a pretty substantial increase in participation from last year. Only 50% of students took the test last year, and this year was up to 87%, which is about the same as what we have gotten in prior years before COVID. We saw 40% of students overall scoring proficient or advanced on the forward. So like I mentioned, we do see that small decrease from last year, but knowing that we had non-random low participation in 2020-21, that looking back before COVID, we actually see an increase in our proficiency rates for literacy. We do know that as a system, and we continue to see that we're preparing students, including our Black students, Hispanic students, students from low income backgrounds to be proficient at lower rates. And we are also doing the same for students with IEPs, which is at 15% proficiency. As students go through our system, looking at still forward ELA proficiency for middle grade students, we saw another increase in participation from last year up to 84%, which is again close to what we saw before COVID. 36% of students in grade 6 through 8 scored proficient or advanced on this test. And those equity concerns that we had at elementary grades persist into middle school for Black students, for Hispanic students, and for students from low income backgrounds. We also see that for students with IEPs at 9% as well. So next we're looking at the percent of students who met growth on their access score. So just looking across our district K through 12 at English language learners. We saw 21% of ELL students meeting their growth target in 2021-22, which is a decline from prior years. In terms of participation, we saw that 98% of students took that test, but only 77% had a prior access score from which that growth target could be calculated. So we're seeing a bit of that participation issue for access as well. And then lastly, in terms of literacy, looking at high school completion, we saw 87% of students in the 2020-21 cohort complete high school in 4 years. So this is a lagging indicator. We have the data for the most recent cohort hasn't been certified yet across the state. So we have to look at the prior year. We do see some fairly positive trends over the past 5 years and going back even farther to the past 10 years for certain groups. We see Hispanic Latinx students increasing 5 percentage points over the past 5 years and students from low-income backgrounds increasing 6 percentage points. If you look specifically at Black students, it is a decline from where we were in 2016-17, but we are seeing over the past 10 years, positive increases for those students as well. And this is one area when looking at high school completion that we see fairly substantial variation by school and seeing particularly strong results at East High School. Go to the next slide, thank you. So switching now to give an overview on climate. So we administered a student climate survey to all students in grades 3 through 12. Over 50% of students participated in the survey. We did see wide variation by school though. So some schools only had 2% of students completing the survey and some schools had 95%. So that's going to limit really what we can understand by looking just at the district. We also saw that that participation varied quite a bit by the level. So 65% of elementary and middle school students participated, but only 30% of high school students. So we know that high school students, our older students, are going to be underrepresented when we look at district averages. That being said, we did see that 74% of students agreed with the statement that they feel like they belong at school. We did see variation by student groups that we can dig into more when we share out that full data set. In addition, we saw that 80% of students agreed with the statement, I feel safe at this school. One thing that we see and have seen historically in our data is that as you look at the data by level and by grade, there's more positivity at elementary school and more declining positivity for the middle and high school grades. And then lastly, we wanted to share just some of the results from our staff climate survey. We had about 52% of staff district-wide respond, the majority of whom were teachers. 66% of staff respondents agreed with the statement, I enjoy going to work, and 66 also agreed that they feel safe at school. Because of some changes to the instrument, we can't directly compare in the most rigorous way these results to prior year results. However, we do think that in looking at prior year results that we're seeing declines in terms of staff sense of safety and enjoyment of work from the before COVID period. And so that's sort of the overview we wanted to share to get ready for that the end of the month, where we'll share that full data set. We intend to share what we have affectionately call the placemat, which is a data visualization showing all of the metrics filterable by site and by student demographic groups, as well as a summary of our analysis looking across all of those data sets. So with that, I think it's time for the discussion.
So before we go into this discussion, I just want to mention two things, and then I will turn it back over to Board Castro. The reason we decided to do a spotlight and just a preview of literacy and climate and culture is because these are two of the priority areas that we are focusing on for the upcoming school year, as well as what we asked schools to prioritize in their school improvement plan. We know that everything is important, but we cannot prioritize everything. And so these two areas, we have heard from our community in the spring that they were not only important to our community, but really important to continuing to focus on improved outcomes for our students. And then second, as a reminder that Bree said that this was just a preview, and we will have the full comprehensive set of data to look at, as well as being able to see ourselves compared to the state in the data that we will dig into at the end of the month. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Board Castro, and you can start the discussion and or questions.
All right, thank you so much, Board Member Vandermill, I see you got your hand up.
Mute. Yes, I have a bunch of them, if that's all right. And I'm still on mute, aren't I?
Nope, you're good.
Oh, I was off mute. Now you can hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, let me get my handy dandy set of questions out. I apologize because I can't read my writing. Thank you for the data. Some questions of the data. How many individuals with disabilities took the forward exam?
I do not have that on hand. I can look into that for you.
You said that disabled students were performing at the 15th percentile. Was that in reading or in math of the forward exam?
The data that I shared today was all for literacy, ELA proficiency.
ELA proficiency? And on climate and culture, how many disabled students, if you know, say they feel safe at school?
That is something we can dig into and share when we pull out that full data set.
And additionally, there's some other things I'd love to know, such as how were testing accommodations performed during the pandemic? Were accommodations able to be performed? I know that it would be difficult during any time, but during a pandemic, maybe worse, and that could affect the data. So if you could find that out, would be great. Also, I'd love to know how many students with disabilities are now receiving ESY because of COVID or because of the pandemic. If that number has gone up, or if it's smaller. And how many special education students are at grade level in math and in reading? And I'm good.
Thank you so much, Board Member Vandermill. And just to reiterate, we will receive the full data package, which can be disaggregated by location and by identity at the end of the month, as well as made available to the public. Thank you. All right, Board Member Simkin.
Thank you. My questions might also be, the answers might be coming at the end of the month, but I'll throw them out there now. I'm wondering, when we look at the graduation rates, and we know that some students with IEPs have additional years of high school, do we have the ability to see the graduation rates of students without IEPs and the graduation rates of students with IEPs as individual numbers? So I'll throw that out there. Cindy, I don't know. I think that's probably pretty easy to parse
I just
out.
wanted to clarify your question, if you don't mind. So one, are you asking to see like our 6-year graduation rate, or are you just asking to look at our 4-year graduation rate, both for students with disabilities and then also disaggregated without our students with disabilities? Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, it is. Well, I guess I'm assuming that the number in that slide was showing that had students with disabilities and students without disabilities both. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, so I'd love to see those numbers pulled out separately as well. And then
Go ahead. I think Bree was just going to respond to that. Sorry,
I may have missed over that. 64% of students with IEPs graduated in 4 years in that 2020-21 cohort. We know that not every student with an IEP has in their IEP that is appropriate or expected that they will graduate in 4 years. So that is something that we would like to dig into deeper to really understand how the details of the plan might fit in with what we're seeing in outcomes.
right, and I guess the other half of that is because it is appropriate for some of our students to have high school for 6 years. How many of our students without IEPs are graduating in 4 years is the other half of that question.
We can make sure that we have that data available for you as well at the end of the month.
Okay, that would be great. My next set of questions involve the feelings of safety question for the climate survey for students and for staff. And I'm wondering, looking at these numbers, what is the plan for follow-up? Do we first dig into those numbers to get more detail around why students and staff are not feeling safe, or do we already have that information? Are we able to determine if it's an institutional issue, an interpersonal issue with peers, more of a societal issue like racism, sexism, ableism, transphobia? Are we able to dig into that in a statistical way so that we can then form a plan for how to make sure that we have school environments that feel safe for everybody?
So I could start to answer that question. I would welcome Beth and Bree to chime in, but also our associate superintendents, excuse me. So we just started introducing the data to our schools next week. And once we are able to kind of share the comprehensive data with you, our schools will be able to look into that climate survey at a more disaggregated way, and through their analysis and through their school improvement plans. Board Member Simpkins, I really believe that's where each school is going to start to pay attention to what they're seeing, both in terms of who completed the survey, who may not have completed the survey, and what those responses are. But I will let others chime into this as well to provide any more information.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I think particularly looking at the student climate survey is a place where we've collaborated really closely with our student and staff supports team to really try to understand what is it, you know, when a student says that they do or they don't feel like they belong, what are the factors that are contributing to that? I do think that our revised or more expanded, I should say, climate survey instrument helps us get to that. So it's just a place for some further analysis, particularly at the school level, given those variation in response rate.
And let me just speak to it, and then I'll have the associates follow up with that. The data itself, I would like to also say it's skewed some because you saw mostly elementary and middle, and from the high school, and what we know is not only here, but across the country, high schools going back into school during the pandemic during that time. There was some questions around, you know, just how safe people felt, be it staff or be it students. So I'm going to look forward to calibrating that data this year. But we did have our associate students being very intentional with our staff at the end of the year and coming into this year. One of our big themes about connectivity, because we've been so much in isolation. So we're looking forward to it this year, but they could speak to some of the intentionality around trying to make sure our students and our staff are really safe in a lot of ways, and not just physically, social, emotional, mental health. That's where we are right now. We'll place a lot of intention. And I thank you all for placing a lot of emphasis on us hiring more in terms of our social workers and the work that we're trying to do with our whole student support services piece going into this year. And the social soups could speak to it more about intentionality of what we're trying to do.
And additionally, we will look at the data and work with schools to refine their strategies around climate and culture to ensure that we really address those data points that you called out earlier today.
Because we know that how culture and climate goes, so does our academics. And so therefore, we're really being intentional about ensuring that building principles are really focusing on ensuring that connections and belonging and identity and all of those things that make up a whole human being are being centered on the front end, and continuing to celebrate and embrace who all staff and scholars are and families in the community, really being intentional about showing up. And again, those things were also done last year, but coming out of the pandemic, I think in a lot of ways, a lot of just corralling around things and just white knuckling was going on. But this year, making sure that they're clear about the support that they have and understanding that we have to be intentional in doing things a bit differently than we have previously.
One example.
Oh, go ahead.
One example I can add to that, what Dr. Hicks and Cindy Green had lifted is, when we're thinking about culture and climate and the data itself, the numeric data, a lot of it lives in the school because our student leaders, our interactions, those questions we ask our students give us the reason for that numeric data. And then we can design the strategies at the school level. The principals can do that. And the same kind of thing applies to staff as well.
Interrupt anybody. Was there anybody else who wanted to respond before I ask my next question? Okay.
Hold something for just a moment. Oh, I'm sorry. Who was that?
No, please go ahead.
Are you sure? So this is Nancy Molfenter. I just wanted to express my appreciation for the questions specific to our scholars with new abilities. So I often say scholars with an IEP, but I'm learning, as always, as many of us are daily, from Dr. Jenkins. And I just wanted to express my appreciation for the request to dig into that data, because we know that when our scholars feel welcome and safe in their school environments, that's when they're going to thrive more academically. So all of the data points that you've asked for, I just want to say I appreciate that, and we'll do my part to make sure we have that available later this month.
Thank you very much. I have one more question and then just a comment. I'm wondering if we're going to be digging into what happened at East High School. Why are the graduation rates higher? I don't know if we have that information yet, but I'd be interested to know what has led to that, and if that's something that we can do. And then my final comment is that I think that the return rate for these surveys was extraordinarily low. And I'm wondering if there could be a better plan moving forward to make sure that we're giving people time within the school day to complete these surveys so that we can get a fully representative sample in, moving forward. And I guess also that students who do need support in completing them, I hope that they're able to receive that as well.
Great, thank you. Board Member Gomez-Schmidt, followed by Board Member Nichols.
I am muted. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of comments and then I have a few questions as well. A couple of my comments is, you know, when it's hard to look at bits and pieces of data at this point without having the full data sets. And I know you have said those are coming, so I'm looking forward to receiving those. It does feel like we're spending a lot of time explaining caveats and how this isn't going to be able to compare to previous years. One of the things I do think we need to focus on, and I've said this before, is that what we need to do is set a new baseline understanding of where our students are starting this school year, using the assessments we currently have in place and the assessments that we were able to use last year. So that's one comment that I have, because that's going to be really important for us moving forward and meeting student needs. Another statement I have, in slide 10, you state that variation in performance of students is the core problem. And I would argue that the variation in performance of students at every grade level from kindergarten to 12th grade is the context in which our schools are operating. And the core problem that we need to address is how to effectively provide instruction to the wide range of learning needs at every grade level from kindergarten to 12th grade. So that's just a couple of comments. One of the questions I have is about the strategic framework metrics and this idea of public accountability and what we're doing with the strategic framework may be different. I think the slide indicated may be different from the metrics our schools use for their school improvement plans. To me, these should be strongly connected with the ultimate goal of improving academic outcomes for students. So I guess my overarching question is can you explain the differences in how we move from accountability to the public at the strategic framework level to connect that to what our schools are doing with their school improvement plans, and then even deeper to the individual students and their learning needs at the grade level and classroom level? Like, how does it all connect vertically so that what we're doing at the large grand level actually affects students at their classroom level and what's happening with them on a daily basis? And then my second question regarding this is, how are the plans that we had in place for 2019-20 for special education, English language learners, and advanced learners fitting into the strategic framework calibration? Because those live somewhere in the middle too, around the school improvement plan area.
Bree, would you like me to?
I can respond to, I think, part of that. So I'll clarify that the public accountability population that's used for the strategic framework is also what we use for the SIP. The point about data being different for different purposes really refers more to essentially, if you were going to take a snapshot at various points throughout the year, because we have mobile students, because students are going in and out of other schools, we have to have a common way that we, at the end of the year, are going to look across the system. So it does match the SIP metrics, that same population of students. But if you were to go in as a teacher to, in October and look at your data, it's not going to match current enrollment. Or it may not match current enrollment depending on the situation. It may not match what you get from the assessment vendor. Just acknowledging that schools are, that we have mobility and we have to have a common way of taking that snapshot. And that is what our public accountability metric allows.
Yeah, I will just add a little more to that in terms of your question, Chris, about the strategic framework metrics and SIP metrics. So what I would say is that those do match in terms of focusing on the outcome metrics. Our schools identify the literacy and the climate and culture metrics similar to what we have up here. So at the elementary level, they look at forward as an outcome metric. At the middle school level, forward as well for literacy and math, and at the high school level, graduation rates, and at ACT. And at the school levels, we focus a lot on what we call implementation metrics or short-term metrics that we're going to talk about in a little more detail when we get to the assessments, really about that kind of in the moment in time, what are we learning about both instruction and what are we learning about our student learning in order to adjust along the way to know how we're doing towards those outcome metrics. And that is because these outcome metrics are usually released after the school year closes, and we don't want to wait until the end of the year to see how our students are doing. So this year in particular, as we're going into the 22-23 school year, we've put a strong emphasis with our schools on paying attention to those short-term metrics or those implementation metrics and using more of that through our quarterly reviews of progress that we've reinstituted, and thinking about kind of some system-wide approaches to pay attention to that data so that we're learning along the way so we don't have surprises at the end of the year, and more importantly, so that we can adjust to our student learning along the way. So hopefully that answers that question. And then I'll answer the strategic framework question, and then I will open it up for my other colleagues to add in as well.
Cindy, before you go on,
absolutely.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Sure.
When we talk about the metrics like the forward exam, one of the things that we used to have before the pandemic is we used to have the MAP test. And the MAP test was really, there was a link between, you could sort of predict based on where a student was in MAP if they would score proficient on the forward exam coming up. Do we have an assessments that do that currently? I know we're going to talk about assessments, but one of my questions, and I can leave this for later if you want to tackle this in the next section of the presentation, but I guess my question about the data sets that we're going to be getting in a couple of weeks, are they going to include beyond the forward exam? Are they going to include some of those other metrics like how Achieve 3000 worked, how iReady worked? Like, what are we actually going to be getting when we get these full data sets?
So I can let Bree answer kind of what comes in your package, and then I can come back and answer a little bit about the other assessments.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So in terms of what we will be sharing as part of that full strategic framework metric packet, wouldn't include at this point, like those implementation metrics that Cindy was alluding to, because the school year hasn't started yet. But we'll share some metrics related to early learning. So PALS 4K, FastBridge for early reading for kindergarten grade 1, FastBridge CBM for grade 2, the forward stuff that we shared today, including forward math, ACT Aspire, reading and math, high school completion, access results, as well as the full climate results and staff retention and teachers of color.
And it'll include the full climate results for both the staff and the students.
That is our intention, to share those, the full results, yep.
And the ACT results as well, because I know you mentioned Aspire, but ACT seems to be missing on.
Yeah, ACT Aspire is the metric for grades 9 through 11. So
okay.
It's a combined metric.
Aspire at grade 9 and ACT at grade 11.
The way it's been operationalized is a combined metric. So for those students in grade 9 through 11, it's ACT and Aspire in one metric, the percent meeting that college readiness benchmark, since they're aligned.
Okay, since we are looking at end of year metrics from last year, and that's part of the data set we're getting, I would like to see the ACT and the Aspire separated so that we can take a look at how our 11th grade students did last year and how our 9th grade. So if that is possible going forward with the data set, that would be great.
Now, let me come in just for a second, okay? And I thank the team, thanks Bree, thanks Cindy too as well, trying to respond to the question Chris asked. Chris, Board Member Gomez-Smith, I'm gonna go back to your baseline data, which you and I've had a conversation about that. Mm-hmm. And understanding anything that happened before the pandemic is different than what happened during the pandemic. So even having baseline during the pandemic is not necessarily gonna be an accurate reflection of where our students are and what it could be. I think we have a unique opportunity because I'm listening to the discussion and we're talking about the metrics in which we have for us based upon what is required. That's one piece of data that we can use, and even going back to the maps. But none of this data necessarily has described or given opportunity for us to show the assets that our children bring to the table, in particular our Black and Brown children. The data sets we're talking about right now are going to be a reflection of what has always been. We're going into a deeper discussion with our buildings, and what I'm really liking, we're talking about how we're going to assess our students different. Yes, we have to do the state accountability piece. All of us know that. We have a moment coming out of the pandemic to do something just a little bit different. And we've been working on our calibration to see how we're going to be able to show the asset that our students bring to the table beyond just the core content as we know it. And we want to look at the resiliency of what our students have done during this pandemic. I'm going to show you a larger data set later. I appreciate the questions that you're asking now, but we also want to introduce at that time when we come back later about other things that we know that students have done, they've pivoted to during this pandemic. And wow, some of them have done some amazing things. So I'm gonna stop right here to be able to say, we'll give you the other data and there's gonna be a larger data set to come back, but we have an opportunity to redefine how we measure and assess for our students. But I don't think all of standardized tests is the only way that we should continue to demonstrate how well our students have done. In fact, it's been detrimental just to use these standardized when we know that our students are coming to school, many of them Black and Brown, poor students are receiving special needs services. We know what they're up against coming in, and we continue to push in on just that. We got to do this and that as we move forward, in my estimation. And I'll talk about it a little bit later.
I appreciate that, Dr. Jenkins. And I think I've appreciated in our conversations that we both have recognized that we do need to have some baseline to know where students are at, to know how to go forward and how to address the learning needs of students acutely and this year. So I do appreciate that. Is what you're talking about the new way of looking at things, is that's what's coming to us on August 27th then, in addition to the full data sets?
Yeah, and another way that we want to just present to you that data that we want to create and how we start measuring, and I could just foreshadow some of it to you in terms of participation in our co-curricular activities. What would that lead to in terms of our students and students' outcome? We want to study that, introducing it's something that we believe that can change our students, because there's clear evidence that students who participated in things outside of just core content, co-curricular, those students have potential for grade point average, those same data points we're talking about, increased average graduating, increased students taking the ACT, but it's bringing the whole child to the table versus just looking at them in a way that we have historically right now. And our whole push in those co-curricular, when we start talking about the arts, or just participating in different activities, it's chess or whatever, those other things, that's what we want to introduce in the 27. I don't want to get too far ahead of our team.
Okay, I will look forward to that information. I appreciate that. And I know other board members have more questions, and we're getting into the actual assessment part. So I hear that. I guess the question that I do want answered is, how do we see the special education, the ELL, and the advanced learning plans fitting into that middle level SIP area between, and how does it fit into the strategic framework planning and data that we're working on?
So I'm happy to start the response to this. We'll talk a little bit about it at the kind of next chunk, which is the strategic framework recalibration. Our schools have in their SIP identified focus areas and focus groups that they are looking at, not only for academic outcomes, but also for areas of culture and climate, family and community engagement, and also monitoring items like the individualized learning plans, et cetera. So that's one way. In addition, through this recalibration process, I think as we continue to hear input from our community, those plans will potentially be uplifted and or morphed. I think we've done a better job in full transparency as a system, paying attention to some of those plans versus others of them. We have some evaluation reports that have identified where we need to go. And with some new staff on board, we're excited that we're going to dust some of that off and really pay attention to some of the evaluation input that we've received as well. That's a little bit about where those plans fit into current state, but also how we see those also potentially coming through this recalibrated strategic framework process.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. I guess I see those plans as now, as you explain that, sitting in between the strategic framework and the SIPs, because when you talk about those focus areas and focus groups, those don't include every student where the schools are choosing. So I think those plans, as we had them in place, really lay out the expectations for every single student that's included in those groups and overlap from those groups, and what's expected, whether or not they're part of a focus group or focus area. So I think it's just really important to keep in mind that all of those plans are outdated now, they're required, and we need to figure out how to fit them into the process. So
yeah,
thank
I
you
appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
All right, Dr. Harvey, did you have something to say?
Well, just lastly, I just really, to Cindy's point and to your point, Chris, we were intentional and we put performance metrics to those focus groups that you called out in the SIP. So we are very intentional in terms of how we monitoring those groups and what those performance metrics around those groups.
All right, thanks. I'll look forward to seeing that in the data set. Thank you.
All right, Board Member Nichols.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to the research and innovation team for the work you've done to pull data together. It sounds like most of us on the board are looking forward to that fuller data set at the end of the month. And thank you for being able to include in some of your comments tonight where some of our students who have individualized education plans are also faring in our district, as you heard public comments tonight about folks not being included. So I'm sure that wasn't intentional, but looking forward to the fuller data set. Let me just say that hearing Dr. Jenkins talk about the way that we should look at data, yes, we have our kind of accountability around the standardized tests, is one aspect that we need to be transparent about, but also being inclusive of the other ways in which our students show up is another aspect that is quite honestly magic to my ears. So I think my questions are just questions of curiosity. I don't want them to be construed as, I have a specific request, but I am really curious about how we may, and if you even would have capacity to show data in a way that does start to paint a different picture. We have a lot of ESSER funding. We have very specific programs that we've implemented. And so this is just where my head goes. And it wouldn't be data for the end of this month. It would be thinking forward, thinking towards the future. But for instance, we did a big investment on ACT prep. What might it look like next or this upcoming spring to look at the students who enrolled, completed ACT prep, and how they landed on ACT, and if you had capacity to maybe do a little bit of a comparison to the rest of their peer group. I think that would, that would tell us something about how not only the ESSER funded programs maybe really had the intended impact that we hope they did, but also tell us a little something different about students who have access and opportunity to different resources. We also do a CBITS screening every year. I don't know that we've ever made the connection between our students who go through CBITS screening and may actually be referred for additional services and programmings and supports, how might they look on the forward exam? You know, so it's about how we're potentially slicing and dicing and interconnecting different data points around the programs and services that we are putting out there for students, and then how might that translate potentially on academic data. So I'm sure for Beth and Bree, you all could come up with, and Dr. Jenkins, you all could come up with all the different ways to show students more holistically. But that's in particular what I'm interested in is, and it's just to be clear, it's not marrying just the ESSER funded programs with academics, but it's trying to look at students more holistically, not as a one point in time standardized test result. I will just say this, that we've also made some investments in our staff. So we had a big ESSER funded investment in Nehemiah's Justified Anger, History for a New Day course, as well as all the letters training. I'd be curious to see, this is again, future and forward thinking for our staff that have completed or attended some of those kinds of opportunities. How might that look on a staff climate survey next spring? And how might that look for classroom, right? Like, are we noticing anything about our staff who might be feeling more connected in certain ways? You know, does that show up in classrooms? So in terms of a climate survey result from students, you know what I'm saying? So I think my comments are more about, I don't even know if you all have the capacity to do this, but thinking through what might be some pretty high leverage or strategic ways to bring a couple of different data points together to tell a really different story or uplift something very different about how our students are experiencing school rather than just a standardized test. I do want to just ask one question of clarification, which is, when we had focused on goal 3 in the past, and I know that, you know, I'm trying not to hang on too much to the past, but I am curious, there had been some metrics identified specifically to see how our African-American Black students were doing, including some of the data metrics that you listed tonight, but also 9th grade on track, advanced learning, identification, and something else related to advanced learning. So I'm not saying that we need to hang on to those, but those have been identified in the past because those were areas that needed some real attention. So specifically for goal 3, have we made any shifts in terms of what we're planning to look at that will come forward later in the month?
Beth or Bree, you want to answer or take a stab at that for Michelle or Board Member Nichols? Sorry.
Sure, I can certainly try. So looking at goal 3, we have those actual metrics more aligned to what we identified for goal 1, looking at those similar metrics. But still, Michelle, if you, Board Member Nichols, like, remember in the past using that more expansive definition of students identifying as Black or African-American than what is used in goal 1. So we've retained that, but are looking more specifically at those metrics with the idea that we'll be able to dig in and identify some additional metrics to really get at that idea of Black excellence.
Okay, and so thank you for that, Ms. Monahan. We're all trying to be so formal as though we don't know each other. Can you also verify, so I heard you say that some questions were added to this year's climate survey. So this is a two-part. Is there still a power question that we're using in the climate survey, particularly for how our Black students and Black staff are responding to that question? Or is that kind of gone away?
You're referring to the question around, I feel like my history and culture is reflected in the school?
Yeah, that's what it was at least a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, and I don't know.
Yeah,
That's
we've
not the right question.
we've retained that question on the survey, so we do have that across the climate surveys. We also do have some additional questions, which you'll see that we pulled from nationally validated climate surveys to try to get additional information about students' perceptions of fairness at their school, things of that nature to kind of build on that data.
Okay, great. There was a second part to the climate survey and it is completely slipped my mind. Oh, I had one other question. Okay, and then I'll be done. In the data set that we'll get, is there an opportunity to potentially do a section of the data that looks at our students who participated virtually this last year? Because I know we had MVE and we had Madison Promise. And I'm just wondering for any academics, kind of standardized tests, but also if they participated in the climate survey, what differences we might see from students who opted in or selected that option for learning. Those are just questions. Otherwise, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the full data set and the discussion.
Thank you, Board Member Nichols. Lavinia, followed by Board Member Muldrow.
I'm just wondering about the history of the climate survey and maybe other similar surveys and kind of what happens after the data is collected. And I know you spoke about this, but I'm just wondering about how it worked out in the past. So can you speak on what has been accomplished in past years, by discussing these possible strategies with schools as an action plan to follow up on the data received from the survey?
So I am happy to start, and let me just restate your question so that I make sure I answer your question correctly. You are asking the use of climate survey or similar surveys, what has happened with the data, and then where have we followed up to see if progress has been met in terms of the actions taken based on the data. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I can talk about past practices, but more importantly, talk about kind of what we and our schools are doing with the most recent set of data. So through kind of our continuous improvement cycle that really at the school level lives in what we call our school improvement plan, staff and their SBLT, so some of their staff members, as well as sometimes students on that group, look and analyze that data and determine a set of actions that they believe they want to take. One, in terms of identifying what the data is telling them that may be working well and what the data is telling them that may not be working well, and then put together a set of actions to try and make improvements in that data. And then using kind of a quarterly review to check in and adjust along the way. The climate survey has been given twice a year. So you get kind of data at the beginning of the year that tells you to Board Gomez-Schmidt's kind of point, like, here's your baseline, this is what we know now. And then measuring that again at the end of the year to see if you've made improvements. Our schools, as I mentioned, just got their data last week, but haven't been able to dig into those questions outside of the power questions that Board Member Nichols just described. And so what we hope at the end of the month is they'll really be able to dig into that, use that information to create a local set of actions. Simultaneously, we at the system level use that data to kind of think about both what we want to do from a system approach, but more importantly, how we see the need to distribute our supports based on what the data is telling us. I am going to pause and see if others want to chime in and just add more to that before we see if we addressed your question, Lavinia.
I would just add that in terms of how we've used and thought about the data is, I think that was sort of the impetus for fleshing out the climate survey and pulling on some nationally validated resources to get that better information that could be understood as more actionable by working with our school and staff supports teams.
I would say some specific examples that have come out of that is our schools have put together a variety of student groups or student action groups, I think, that have helped to kind of pulse check how things are going. Some have worked well and some have not worked so well. So this kind of continuous improvement cycle, I think, as we go into this upcoming school year or as we're kind of coming out of COVID and thinking about how we want to approach school differently is going to be very important. But I did see Dr. Hicks, did you come off mute to add to the response?
Yeah, I was just going to just reiterate or add to what you all have been saying around really it's a great deal of school communities, staff, really looking at the data and ensuring that they're continuing to meet the needs of scholars and families and staff, and coming together to plan for that intentionally and using, after identifying strategies, using those quarterly progress monitoring times to ensure that they are continuing to do that work intentionally. Also, it coming even more regularly around intentional culture and climate walkthroughs within school buildings as well, which keeps a pulse at that. And a lot of schools kind of pull some of those power questions and then hone in on them, and then continue to reflect and adjust and build upon what their school's needs are.
Thank you. I just have another question. Do you notice any trends between the data taken at the beginning of the year versus the end of the year? And this doesn't necessarily have to apply to only this year.
So going forward, we'll be able to do that. We piloted a slightly different version in the fall of 2021-22 than we did out in the spring. And we saw kind of due to some of the wild variation by school in terms of participation. I think going forward into this upcoming year, we're really excited to be able to dig into that with school teams, particularly since we have our climate survey back on the assessment calendar and hopefully be able to increase participation by having much more rigorous plan for how we're administering this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Muldrow.
Thank you so much, Board Member Castro. I want to focus on the data that you all did present to us tonight because you did give us some pretty significant and alarming data, honestly. And so I want to hone in first on slide number 14. Jesse, do you mind bringing that slide up for me? So I think specifically on slide 14, numbered slightly differently on my board docs version of it. So I will say, slide where you see 9% of Black students are proficient in terms of reading. You know the slide I'm referencing, this one, exactly. So one, I'm like, that 9% proficiency rate is incredibly alarming. The other thing I want to say is I agree so much with Dr. Jenkins and board member Michelle Nichols. The forward exam doesn't tell you how kids feel about reading or even their ability to read. It tells you how they feel about the forward exam. And I'm going to use my own child as an example. My child came home after taking the forward exam and said, "Mom, you forgot to opt me out of the exam. All my friends were opted out." She said, "I was really upset that I had to take it. Most of my friends didn't have to take it, but then I told my teacher that, and she said, don't worry about it. It doesn't count." So she just didn't try very hard on it because she had been told it doesn't count towards her grade. And she really felt the impact of a lot of her classmates not having to take it. So my first question is, what percentage of our students opted out of the forward exam?
I can share that we'll be sharing the opt-out report as part of that full data set. I don't have the number at hand today, but we have that in our packet for the end of the month.
So I would think a very important distinction to make right now is when you say 9% of Black students, I assume that you're talking about all Black students. It doesn't in any way on that slide indicate that you're talking about of the percentage of Black students who took the forward exam, this is the proficiency rate. And I think that data in and of itself is incomplete in a way that is misleading and tells a really disparaging story about our African-American students and our students of color in general when it comes to reading. So I think having complete data when we're talking about something this sensitive is really important in terms of public perception and also in terms of the way our young people see themselves. I want to go now to what is, I think, slide 18 when I'm looking at it in board docs, but it is the slide that says, overall, students agreed with the statement, "I feel like I belong at this school," with variations by student group. The lowest was Black female students. Black female students were 60% of students. So just a little more than half of Black girls feel welcome at school versus white students, who about 78 are white male students who are the most likely to feel welcomed at our school. This is a really alarming piece of data because I identify as a Black woman because I'm raising 3 little Black girls. And I think that to just go past that as if it isn't a significant thing or a warning to us about the way some of our young people are feeling at school based within their identity is something that I find really concerning. So I'm hoping you all, you put that up there, you brought this snapshot of data to us intentionally. What were you hoping we took from that specific bullet point?
I guess, across the data, we tried to pull out where we saw substantial variation by student groups and saw, as you note, pretty substantial variation on that question. Belonging is a key component of what we know contributes to student academic success. So wanted to highlight it with the caveats that we know participation was not ideal this past year. Just noting that there is that troubling variation in our results that we do have.
So
go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I definitely want to hear from you, Cindy Gray.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know if there was a singular intent behind it, but I think this goes to where we think about some of our intentional investments that we've started to make. I think about at middle school and some of the girl group work that we have been contracting out with some of our community partners, and the importance of creating time and space in our schools for work like that, as well as our Black Girl Magic work that happened across our school. So I would just name that the data is the data, and what we are thinking about in terms of our investments, current state and moving forward, I think are critically important. Because I think that data also ties back to how our students feel about themselves as readers, as critical thinkers, as critical writers, etc. So the importance of that, I would just name.
Yeah, so I would also say, looking at national data, that Black girls are the most likely people to be reprimanded at school. They're the most likely people to get in trouble. That's not just an accurate statement about MMSD. That is a trend we see across the country. And then I would say white male students are the most likely students to be identified as talented and gifted, particularly in the areas of mathematics. And so again, when we're talking about having an expansive relationship to data, who is celebrated for their intelligence and their intellectual value at school, and who is monitored, policed, and reprimanded for their behavior is impacting whether or not students are successful in our schools. I also want to point out that 60% of students, of Black girls who feel welcomed at school, that has a direct relationship to our graduation rate. And I want to say, I think it is profoundly concerning. We need an enormous shift. When we have a district that makes it so 6 out of 10 Black students who attend this district graduate from this district. That is something that we cannot accept, and that we have to do something about. It is representative of something urgent and something horrific. And so I don't think we can, look at the numbers presented tonight and wait for more information. I think we really have to notice that these are some pretty alarming figures you all are giving us, and be committed to doing something to change that reality for our young people. So I think those are the 3 points of data that you all gave us that I found to be the most concerning. The other thing I want to say is, when we're talking about whether or not our schools are welcoming and safe, talking about our LGBTQ students, particularly our trans and non-binary students, is incredibly important right now. Our trans and non-binary students are under attack by our legislature. They are getting messages all the time that they can be discriminated against, that they are not welcomed, that they shouldn't get to participate in sports. And what our district is doing to address that and acknowledge the strain that creates for our young people is really important. And so I hope that we are, remembering that our students who sit at the intersection of race, sexuality, gender, income, disability, our Black girls who have all of those intersecting identities, are the students who are the most likely to end up incarcerated, are the students who are most likely to have the most desperate outcomes within our community. And acknowledging the intersectionality of the way we are looking at our young people is something I hope we do moving forward and see in the data that you bring forward to us later this month. Thank you all so much for your presentation.
Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just keep my questions kind of brief. I just wanted to one up with what Ali said. I think it is super important as a Black woman also raising Black daughters in the district who are now in preteens. I just wanted to bring back up what Lavinia said. I didn't really hear a clear answer, but I guess I just wanted to bring back what she said was just, how are we following up on the data and ensuring that we are circling back, because we can collect all the data that we want, but if we're not circling back with the students, with the teachers on updates or just any kind of other data points, including, how are we administering these surveys? How are we including them in the process of administering the surveys? Because I can tell you right now, if you just go to some youth and be like, fill this out, it's not going to happen. But if their peers maybe like, hey, let's work on this and fill this out together, this is important, X, Y, and Z, that creates a different kind of dynamic when collecting that data. And so I guess for me, the question is always, what have we learned from how we are doing this and assessing this? I think it looks like, at least to me, the data has been pretty consistent and it hasn't necessarily changed. And to go back to Ali's points about just even with Black girls, as you look at the data, it still has not changed. And I can contest to that as a student who went through MMSD myself. And that was many moons ago. You know, so what have we learned about when we're assessing, or not necessarily assessing, but what have we learned when we're administering the surveys to get and gather the information from students? And what things can we just like stop doing? Because that really is like one of my biggest things this year is like, we're constantly doing a lot of the same, I was going to use like explicit, sorry. We're doing a lot of the same things. And at some point we need to like stop doing some things and change and pivot and do things differently. And I do think that we do have, again, the opportunity to do so. Yeah, so that's kind of like my question, but also like a comment. And I hope that we can learn from how we're actually doing it and maybe hopefully change so that we can include more participation in surveys.
I would also just like to share one, you know, we think about collecting data and what it means and how we collect the data. One of the things that, you know, I started doing last year and we will continue across the superintendent, associate superintendent level is, you know, collect us as the associate soups collecting data with scholars directly and having some core questions that we ask. You know, it's kind of replication of what I did as a principal. I began it last year, and that's hanging out with Dr. Hicks, where I'd go in, principals, you know, let them know I'm coming, identify some scholars, and we sit and we talk and ask questions around how their experience is, what we could be doing better, what could we be doing differently, and, you know, them thinking about if they could do something just with no bars on that, what would that be and why? And then sharing that data back out to school principals and their teams so that they can have some more, you know, close touch data, real authentic data that's not tied to necessarily, you know, some standardized test.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dr. Hicks. And it just made me think of something that I forgot to mention as well, is that, you know, what it really comes down to is that students, when they are involved in the work in their schools and involved with making their school climates better, like it will get better because they are a part of the solution and we are including them in an intentional way. And so, you know, that what you said just now just definitely fits with that. You're including young people to make the changes that they want to see. And we will get a greater investment from them. And because it's their environment, it's really for them and they're creating that for themselves. So that's just another thing to just really think about as we're doing this. It's like, you know, as adults, we can say like, these are the things that we know from what we've learned, what we've been taught, what we have experienced, but these are the young people who are experiencing it in the now. And so it's super important to ensure that they are part of those solutions to make their environment better. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Board Member Pearson. I just want to conclude with a few comments. One might be annoying, but data is socially constructed, and what I mean by that is that we attempt to capture human phenomena or experiences through imperfect but still necessary measures. And so historically, that has had a negative impact on Black and brown folks because the result of that data has been used to portray folks in a negative light or to punish people. And as researchers and as practitioners, we have to acknowledge that and attempt to regain the trust, or I guess build new trust, because the trust was never there, to build new trust with those populations, and that will require new methods of collecting data. And I think we have to look at that. And also there are two types of data. And so I'd be interested in learning the stories. So for example, some environments, as has been talked about, some things that make particularly white male students feel safe at school don't make black girls feel safe at school. And so we have to dig into these meanings as well through storytelling. And I am interested to learn more about how we are training folks in the school at good data methods, and identifying people who may have the most trust with some students to build that trust to administer these surveys so that we get higher response rates. Finally, is that as we look into more at the school by school level pictures, are there certain high leverage strategies being used by these schools that we can learn from? And so with that, I will move on to our next agenda item, which is the strategic framework recalibration. So on to you, Associate Cindy Green.
Thank you, Board Member Castro. Jesse, could you share the screen again? I just want to reiterate the importance of hearing from our students and hearing from our community to know how to move forward, that we are not just lifting our students' voices, but our students as part of the action and the plan. So that is what we would like to do moving forward. And we've heard from our students in saying, we've told you what we desire, so it's upon us now to act upon that. And that's where we're at right now. Could you go to the next slide, Jesse? Thank you. So as a reminder, we are in the process of recalibrating on our strategic framework. The strategic framework was drafted in 2018, and this was pre-COVID and under a different administration. We really would like to think about where it is we are going, kind of taking the long view with our framework and post COVID to really get to impact and improved student outcomes. So we, next slide, please, Jesse. I'm going to turn it over to Bree in just a minute, but I'm going to just set up the first few slides. You could go to the next slide. So as a reminder, some of you actually were at a few of these sessions. We did 5 input sessions across the community back in May and June. It seems like a very long time ago, to get started around what our community thinks is working well in our system and where our community thinks we need improvements. This is just the start of data collection, right? This is not all of the data we need to recalibrate on our framework, but this is the start. And so we wanted to share with the board and with the community what we've heard so far and also where we are going. You can see here kind of the sessions and where they were. We did 1 virtual, we did 4 in person, which were really exciting because it was some of our first in-person community sessions that we had had in some time. And we asked a set of guiding questions at each one of these input sessions, which you can see over here in blue. I'm going to ask Jesse that we go to the next slide. And so here's a little bit of how the data was collected. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bree Monahan, and she's going to walk you through the next slides.
Thanks, Cindy. So the data that I'm going to walk through is in response to 2 questions. First, who, acknowledging that this is, as Cindy mentioned, sort of just the beginning of this work, who participated in these sessions? And then so far, what high-level themes emerged from these sessions that we can learn from? So we collected data that includes session feedback notes, note cards, and participant attendance. And then an analyst on our team reviewed and analyzed the data, applied inductive qualitative codes to organize the data by theme. Go to the next slide. So who participated in the sessions? As you can see in the graph on the right, the majority of participants were identified as family members. We also saw a fair number of staff, a smaller number of community members, and a smaller number of students. In total, across those 5 sessions, we saw 98 participants attend. In terms of what we learned from this limited and initial data set, for the first question, we asked respondents to think about their experiences in MMSD overall and respond to what was working well and what could be improved. Participants thought that things that were working well included our transition back into buildings, school-based staff's efforts to meet student needs, and then particular programs, including full day 4K, community schools, AVID, advanced learning, et cetera. In terms of area of improvement, we saw themes around staff morale and staffing at all levels, and also some concerns from parents around bullying, school safety, students' SEL and mental health needs. There was a little bit of a disagreement around whether, or at least multiple opinions, I should say, around sense of the district's communication of updates. Some thought that was positive, while some felt disconnected. So this second slide really focuses in on that first goal, the district, that every child is on track to graduate ready for college, career, and community. Working well, themes included college counseling that helps students and families navigate systems, apprenticeships, internships, those other opportunities to explore options outside of the college track. And then programs like Full Day 4K and AVID were cited as working well under this goal as well. In terms of areas to improve, elementary and middle school curriculum that prepare students for high school and beyond, student engagement, coming back to in-person school after a year plus of being virtual, better training on trauma-informed practices and restorative justice, improving student outcomes, notably in literacy, and making them more equitable. And then the last theme under this question was more differentiation in preparing students for life post-high school. In terms of goal 2, which is that the district and every school in it is a place where children, staff, and families thrive, it was noted that some schools had culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy that is working well. It was also noted that lifting up and speaking about successes in the district contributes to a positive morale. And then MMSD's commitment to this idea of student belonging and making diversity central to our vision as a successful element of this goal. In terms of improvements needed, we heard from respondents that reconnecting families and parents to schools, particularly in those middle and high school grades for older kids, prioritizing staff well-being and retention through increased pay and hiring more staff so that they can thrive, more BIPOC classroom teachers, more PTO and staff diversity is an area for improvement, and then better transitions between school levels. All right. And then related to goal 3, that the district has established a goal that African-American children and youth excel in school. Respondents identified that naming Black excellence as an explicit framework goal is an area of success that's working well. Specific programs like the People Program, Black Girl Magic that was cited earlier, and Read Your Heart Out. And then again, some schools' integration of culturally relevant anti-racist curriculum and pedagogy into their school culture, acknowledging that that is not as uniform as it should be at this point. And then in terms of improvement, more Black teachers and teacher leaders, not just staff, more diverse advanced learning students identified and supported. Taking curriculum beyond Black History Month at some schools and some classrooms. And then lastly, more connections for Black parents from schools, such as through family liaison type positions. So I think I'm going to turn it back to Cindy to talk about next steps.
Thank you, Bree. Absolutely. So some of the next steps, just as a reminder, the board approved a contract for us to work with some consultants, 4 a.m. Consulting. And they are going to be starting input sessions and some focus groups for students, staff, our community, as well as potentially for our board. They're going to support us with the development of our approaches to implementation, which I think gets into some of the previous conversation we just had, improvement and the impact of what our priority work needs to be. And then continuing to support us through that messaging across all stakeholders, really in digestible and accessible language. We heard that from the small group we've heard from so far as areas of improvement. So that's just a few of our next steps. Jesse, could you go to the next slide, please? I will turn it back over to Board Member Castro to see if the board has questions and or any discussion.
All right, thank you. Board Member Vandermillen, followed by Board Member Pearson.
Yes, I'm thrilled about the work, but just please include the special ed community and special ed parents, especially after hearing people today on how they feel they are not included in the decision making at MMSD. I think it's even more important that we specifically target these parents, because oftentimes they aren't targeted, because oftentimes they can't always find someone to watch kids. Sometimes they can't do it at the normal time. So some phone interviews tend to sometimes work better. So I would strongly request that. And that's the only question. That was the only statement I have.
Thank you, and I really appreciate that comment, and we will definitely make sure that that happens. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Board Member Pearson, followed by Board Member Simpkin.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm hearing a lot of like Black Girl Magic and other kind of initiatives that we are utilizing to be able to, I guess, have our students and our scholars like participate in to feel more included. I guess my question is just like, at like what investments, like to what extent of the investments that we have been doing in some of these organizations and groups, and also like how are we ensuring that there's a wide range of organizations, partnerships, and groups that we are working with is like my first kind of question. And then also just more specifically with Black Girl Magic, because I do know that they were one of the big ideas. And just more so like where we're at with that. And then also, are we looking to possibly continue to expand further after, you know, the big ideas kind of is concluding for the first year or so.
Thank you for lifting that. One, I think that was just named as an example. I think we're definitely looking for more expansive, but specific to the second part of your question around the big ideas, I will open it up. I'm not sure who from our team maybe is able to answer that more specifically. And if not, we'll definitely get you an answer, Board Member Pearson, but I'll pause for a minute to see if our team can answer that. Okay, Board Member Pearson, I'm going to take that as we will definitely make sure those that are leading the big ideas provide a response to you about that specific question. Unless Dr. Jenkins, I didn't know if you were just trying to say something. I apologize.
Yes, we're going to come back with a more expansive report in that particular area. I know Ms. Stanford Taylor is working also with Madison 365 leadership, something we're going to do here in the fall. And I'll have her to speak to that, to the board about what we're doing, creating other opportunities for our students.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Simpkin.
Yes, thank you. So I heard you acknowledge it's a very small sample of people who've responded initially, which is making me think about how easy it is for people who have privilege to raise their voice when asked what they think. And so I want to make sure that you get a chance to articulate how and who are the groups that you are going to be making sure that we as a district are going to and partnering with so that they can be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are in the process of mapping that out right now with our consultants. We will also work very closely with our Carolyn Stanford Taylor's department, which is the engagement, equity, and diversity department, to make sure that we are tapping into and engaging our families and our communities that have been historically excluded and we would like to hear from. One of the members of the organization that we're working with, 4AM Consulting, we chose them is because of her deep ties to the community and to engage with some of our communities that we don't normally hear from or normally are not going to come to some of the spaces that we set up. So that is our goal, to go out to the community and hear from them. They are in the process of thinking about focus groups right now, as well as additional input sessions and different ways to actually ask the questions, right? The way we started this process was pretty traditional through these community input sessions. And so we are tapping into their expertise also to think about other ways to get the input from our community. So we'll be excited to share more details with you as we work with them.
It was specifically Board Member Simpkin. We started off on the north side, on the south side at the Urban League, and then we went to Mendota, and we're just trying to make sure we go throughout our entire community to get all the voices. Thanks for raising that as well. But we realized through our Facebook Live, we did not connect with all of our families in our community to raise those voices.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a sample size or respondents of 90 respondents is a pretty tiny way to start. Are you going to be collecting demographic information on the participants so that you can see if there are holes in the data that you're collecting?
Yeah, for the data that we had so far, it was more self-reported, but depending on which way we collect the data, we're able to gather some of that as well.
And is there a plan to perhaps use trusted allies or people within certain communities to act as, I don't know if liaisons is the right word, but to support families in being able to feel comfortable asking the questions? So I'm thinking of maybe families who don't speak English, families who are undocumented, families who we really need to have everybody's voice lifted in this. So making sure that we have trusted people that are working with them.
Yeah, we had tapped into our translators just for this first round, but I think, and we had a family liaison that was supporting us as well. But I think to your point even further, which is why our consultants that we are working with are going to really begin to think about the variety of ways to gather this input and leveraging their expertise in this to do some of the things you just named. So yes.
Board Member Gomez-Schmidt.
Thank you, Board Member Castro. Cindy, can you just give us a quick indication, like overview of the timeline you expect for this engagement process and when you'll be coming back to the board with more results, and like how long it will take to actually get to a new strategic framework as an endpoint?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. So we have a few formal times throughout the year where we're going to come back. So we're going to come back in October. And if I remember correctly, it's sometime in second semester to provide updates. Bless you. Bless you. And then again sorry, I think it was in March where sometime in second semester, we're going to provide updates. And then from there, we, as you know, have our consultants for approximately 18 months where we are going to be working with them. I can't name the exact time yet that we are going to have a recalibrated strategic framework. Ideally, we would have something going into the 23-24 school year, so we're all launching with that. But I think what we need to see is what data do we collect, what input have we gotten, and how far along do we get throughout these kind of moments in time over the next 6 months for that, which is why we want to intentionally continuously provide updates to the board so that you are with us along the way and know where we are in the process.
That sounds great. And if there are things that we end up highlighting that we see as high leverage items and we can integrate those into what we're doing along the way, I think that's important to do also as we're working towards a final product. I'm hoping that we don't need a final product to launch some of the things that we learn along the way.
Absolutely. And I would say, I think we're going to have an opportunity, to engage the board in a more intimate conversation around that as well coming up soon. So that'll be another opportunity to share thoughts. So I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
I see Miss Stanford Taylor. I thought I saw her on here, board member Castro, but I wasn't sure, so.
No, I did. I know there were a couple of questions that had to do with the engagement department. And I just wanted to say, we're looking forward to coming before you and giving you an update on all the work that we're doing around engagement. I heard Dr. Jenkins mention that we are planning with 365, a high school conference that's coming up in October. He does the Black and Brown Professionals Conference. We are working with high school students to plan their own side-by-side conference. They will be able to access the professionals who are in that space and to integrate with them at some points, but it will be their planning of what this should look like for themselves. And we've been working with 365 along with that, and we'll give you a greater update on. The other thing is we want to work in collaboration with the schools. We believe that relationships are grounded in the school and in the school community. So we want to be partners with them in building and creating that relationship with parents and with students. So we've got some ideas about that as well. And then I'll also give you an update on where we are with our Village Builder project. And those positions we see as being key to some of the same conversation that you're talking around. How do we get those voices into the space where we can actually hear them and do some actionable items around what they're suggesting? So just wanted to put that in the space. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanford Taylor. Also want to mention, quality is not quantity. So do appreciate the level of quality we're getting, albeit from 94 folks. Real quick, Cindy, I am wondering if you can help us connect how this work translate into the academic plan or specific portions of the academic plan and how that will flow to us in the work group.
Absolutely. We are working on a graphic too. We love graphics and Mmsd to help with the visual. But what I would say is the strategic framework, as we all know, is kind of all encompassing of everything that happens in our system, from HR to operations to how we engage with our community. And so we are recalibrating across the entire system of everything we need to do to reach our 3 strategic goals. A piece of the strategic framework is the academic plan, right? I call it a slice of the strategic framework, probably not the most articulate language, but it is a piece of the strategic framework that really focuses on kind of the expectations, roadmap, and guidance for our schools around teaching and learning. So if you remember in the spring, we did a lot of input with our students most specifically and with our staff to kind of hear what would they desire in terms of the learning experiences and the classroom experiences for themselves and as the adults in the school for them. And so from that, we've been able to begin to draft a academic plan. That academic plan uplifted that literacy and culture and climate are the things that people desire to focus on, both to ensure we're focusing on our social, emotional well-being of our students and staff, as well as the early literacy and beyond priority. So that is continuing to evolve. And as Chris, board member Gomez-Schmidt named, that we can put things in place that provide guidance and provide a clarity and a roadmap for individuals while we are building out a full plan. So hopefully that provides, I hope I didn't muddy the waters more, but hopefully that provides a little bit of understanding around how we're thinking about the academic plan and its connection to the larger strategic framework that we are recalibrating upon.
Thank you. Moving on to the next piece, which is our assessment overview and plan. Not sure who's going to take this on, but let's get to it.
I will start, and then I'm going to turn it over after I kick us off to Dr. Racine Gillis, who is our Executive Director of Assessment and Learning Supports. So our last topic of the night is giving a preview and insight into our assessment plan for next year, and also helping to articulate how we define and think about assessments in MMSD. Jesse, would you mind going to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. So what you can see here is a Wordle, and what you can see is really everything that we have gathered from individuals around the input in terms of what they would like to see in a comprehensive assessment system and how we think about assessment in MMSD. We originally developed, sorry, yeah, if you could just stay on that slide for a minute. We originally developed a comprehensive assessment plan back in 2018. So again, pre-COVID. And at that time, we had heard from our school staff, from our principals, from our instructional coaches about what they desired for an assessment plan and where we had some real gaps in that plan. And since then, we've created a very iterative process where we have made some shifts over time. Some in terms of shifts in the types of assessment we are using, and also in terms of when we administer those assessments. For this upcoming school year, we wanted to be even more intentional about gathering some input around our assessments and thinking about the assessments that are most meaningful in terms of what we're learning about our students, and most meaningful in terms of how that is changing and informing the day-to-day instruction. So we did quite a few sessions with the individuals named here on this screen to create what our assessment plan is for the next school year. Can you go to the next slide, please, Jesse? I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Racine Gillis, and she's going to walk us through the next few slides.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy, and board members and Dr. Jenkins for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you all. Just a reminder, a quick reminder, because we pulled out a slice of our assessment, our comprehensive assessment strategy, to just be focusing on our academic and language assessment strategy tonight. But you do have, last month you were given the comprehensive assessment calendar by grade level, as well as a written document related to this assessment strategy. So our strategy, as Cindy was alluding to, given all of the input that we've received, it is in alignment with our current district assessment vision, the strategic framework, goals and metrics, as well as our school improvement plan, priority areas, and metrics. And before I get into this graphic, just what I thought in hearing tonight, there was a lot of connections on the previous conversations. And just as Bree had described earlier, that different data have different purposes. And so different types of assessments also provide information which can be used for different purposes, which I'm hoping to illustrate here. And so this is a graphic representation of how our 4 main assessment types work together to let us know how students are progressing in skills, standards, and individualized learning goals over the course of a year. So basically, we can just in terms of common language and understanding, we can categorize assessments by cycle length and purpose, which is represented on the slide in front of you. So we're going to start with the blue dots, which are those short cycle formative assessments. That's the cycle. So they're short. They're often day-to-day, formal or informal teacher assessments. They are created and used by teachers to inform and adjust their lessons. The purpose of the short cycle assessments are really to inform instruction. And they are really like where we place a high premium on supporting schools and being able to gather this data in this, timely in this timely way so that teachers can adjust their instruction accordingly. Then just above that, we have the green dots, which represent interim instructional tasks or assessments. So these are more of like your mid-cycle assessments designed to assess students' progress towards mastery of grade level standards. And the purpose for these assessments is also to inform instruction, but kind of at that macro level of how students are progressing on their standards. And then we get to screening, which are those 2 gray dots that you see above the green. And they are a type of interim assessment called screening. And there are our critical screeners that we have talked about in previous times with the board that you all have mentioned tonight. FastBridge, we have Achieve 3000, Level Set, or iReady. Those are examples of some critical screeners. They can be given up to 3 times a year. They are typically quick, sensitive to change, general indicators of a larger skill set. So screening helps us know who is on or off track for reaching year-end outcomes and how our students are progressing across the year. So screening is really essential to assessing those foundational skills in the areas, in particular, the areas of reading and math, as well as being able for school teams to think about how as a result of that data, what needs to be put in place? Do additional challenges or enrichment need to happen based on the data? Do we need additional supports or some readjustments within core instruction? And a unique feature of screening is that it can be used for multiple purposes. So I believe board member Gomez-Schmidt, you were talking about the predictive validity, and you, in this case, you were talking about MAP, but all of our screening measures do have a predictive validity, which is great at the beginning of the school year so that we know that we're not missing anybody. So we can assess all students and understand where they are and what we need to do in order to ensure that our students keep accelerating and also can reach those year-end benchmarks. We can also use them instructionally when we incorporate other diagnostic measures, which are often found in curriculum embedded assessments, and we can use them evaluatively depending on the time of the school year. And then finally, in the purple, we have our summative assessments. And so that's usually 1 point in time. Cycle length is very infrequent. And the purpose of that is for evaluation. So those are typically our state and federally mandated assessments. All of the assessments work together to ensure that students are on track to reach those year-end benchmarks or grade level standards, as well as to meet their own individual learning goals. And just to remember, the next slide is a little bit of a different view, but similar in terms of how it's integrated, in that we know no one assessment can tell us everything that we need to know about a student. So we have to use a body of evidence to understand our students' strengths and opportunities. So I think, Cindy, you had mentioned previously tonight, you know, really wanting to understand what are we learning about our scholars? What are we learning about our instruction? And how are we learning along the way so that we're not surprised at the outcomes when we reach the end of the year? And so if we, this slide really just illustrates it not over a course of a year. So you could think about this as a unit, or you could think about this as a quarter, but it's how it all works together in terms of getting to those outcomes that we want to see for our students. And that it really is, someone had mentioned previously tonight, that it is really an iterative process that supports teachers with information that they need to reteach, plan, adjust within their day-to-day instruction. So now we can move from the illustration to actually what some of our assessments are by grade level. So first we have elementary assessments, and the assessments are categorized in terms of how I presented them in terms of cycle length and purpose. So we have critical screening. I'm not sure you need me to read it all, so I'll just give you a minute to look at it. One thing is what we'll get to at the end. We'll talk about a little bit about reduction in time. Please note that there are curriculum embedded and interim instructional assessments, and those really correspond to our adoption of our new literacy materials, as well as our bridges for mathematics curriculum. And so those are school monitored and within the curriculum, and are not often, they're not like you think of tests. Sometimes they're performance tasks, or they're incorporated within the lesson. So that it very much is a part of the teaching and learning cycle, so that it doesn't seem like something extra, but it's understanding where students are in any point in time to be able to, again, adjust instruction. Okay, I think we could go to middle school. And then high school. Okay, and then the last time really talks about amount of time in testing. And just a couple things to say about this is that it is critical, we know, for teachers, administrators, district leadership, board, to have access to the most effective assessments, resources, and strategies so that students reach their next level of learning. In particular, I know we've talked about this in the past, but really this idea of striking a balance between the need for assessment and the instructional time it takes to administer the assessments. And that we know, we've had discussions that both locally and nationally, there is a concern about over-testing. So we have worked intentionally to decrease the amount of time students engage in assessment while still gaining insights, like having the ability to gain insight on students' academic performance and growth. But it is really not just about decreasing the time in assessment, it's about the quality of assessments that we use. And so we need the data that is going to be informative and used to improve the learning outcomes for all of our students. To this point, we really feel like we have been intentional about the assessments that we've prioritized here. And we believe that they are the most important and provide valuable information to teachers, students, and their families. And so you can see here, we have a range of percent of instructional hours per year, which range from 0.01% in the least tested grade to the most tested grade, which is 8th grade with a program DLI is 1.11%. That is the only grade that is above grade and program type that is above 1% of instructional hours per year. And it does represent a decrease in about 3.42 hours less than last year. and our reductions from testing, you can see, came from those 3 bullets at the bottom of the slide. And all of this being said, I really want to reiterate the point that Dr. Jenkins and Associate Superintendent Cindy Green and several of you have made tonight, is that we do have, while we want to streamline our assessment and we want to ensure that everybody, all the teachers and staff and leadership have what they need to ensure that we understand strengths and weaknesses of our students, we also have the continued opportunity to redefine how we assess our students in more innovative and student-centered ways. And so we're looking to think about that more fully as we're thinking about our academic plan and how we use non-traditional metrics to assess our students in light of our graduate vision. So thank you for that and all your conversation that you have been having tonight about the data.
Thank you, Dr. Racine-Gillis. I'm just going to say a few more things before I turn it over to Board Member Castro. You could take us off screen share, Jessica, because the next slide is just a discussion. I just want to reiterate what Dr. Racine-Gillis said in terms of we worked very closely with many of our staff to try and understand which of the assessments they found value in terms of informing instruction, and still trying to figure out this balance of paying attention to how we're learning about our students' academic progress, as well as thinking about non-traditional ways to measure their success, right? And that's a continual work that we'll do. What you also didn't see on this screen that we mapped out in the assessment calendar that we shared with you is where we were intentionally positioning the climate survey that we shared earlier today, and where that will be 2 times a year in a way that we heard tonight, ensuring that we're providing more time for that and more kind of structure for that in order to potentially get a greater response rate. So that is definitely in our calendar. And then just the last thing I will say is with the kind of shifts that we've tried to make in the assessments, we're trying to, again, focus more on those short-term implementation metrics that are providing more real-time information for our staff and about the student learning in order to make adjustments. So with that, I will pause and I will turn it back over to you, Board Member Castro, to guide us in the discussion and questions.
Thank you so much. Board Member Muldrow, followed by Board Member Nichols.
Yeah, so I want to ask really specifically about the data driven by our classrooms and our teachers. So how do we look at grades and GPAs and things that are indicators of our students' long-term success or relationship to coursework or materials, and indicators that might also relate to you know, the relationship our young people have in the classroom. So if we know that on average, our Black students who do graduate with a GPA that is, you know, whatever, what does that tell us about how the average student experiences our school or experiences success within our schools? So that's my first question about grades and GPAs. And then I want to come back to a question around how much time our kids are spending doing assessments and testing.
So I will start the response to that. President Muldrow, if you remember, we have had 9th grade on track in place for about 5 years now, and 9th grade on track specifically focuses on grades and GPA as well as credit attainment. And that is one way that we have paid close attention to monitor how our students are doing in terms of GPA, credit attainment, and being on track. We have also kind of scaled that approach through 10th through 12th grade. So we're not just looking at that as 9th grade, but we're looking at across the grades. Some of those rituals and routines we need to, I think, strengthen and get back to as we go into next year. One of the pieces that I would say that we instituted a few years ago was the concept of what we call B's or better, or a 3.0 GPA as well. So not just focusing on credit attainment and where our students were in terms of their GPA. We learned a lot about students' success based on GPA, and also focusing on a 3.0 or higher as well, or B's or better is what we used in our high schools for that. So that is another way that we are definitely looking at what's happening. I would say with that is paired attendance, and what we see and what we've heard and learned from our students is sometimes attendance for certain courses looks different for a student, and how we can really dig into what's happening in terms of a particular class where a student is thriving and going to all the time and doing really well, and what we can capitalize on that in terms of learning across the schools. I would say our high schools got into a great place of PLC process, where they were learning from each other in terms of successes, and what we call success teams, where they were coming together to talk about like students, to learn from each other in terms of where one of them may be having success with students and one of them is not. Full transparency, last year that was really tough to do in terms of success teams and do some of that kind of cross-sharing work, because we were in a place where many of our staff were doing overloads and or subbing. So it is structures and systems that we found to be very impactful and would like to get into place as we get into this upcoming school year.
Can I ask, Cindy, can you provide data on GPAs for middle school and high school students to the board?
Absolutely. We have done that before. I will lean towards, without saying yes, we have that information, but I will lean towards my R&I team to give me the thumbs up that that is something at some point we could provide to you. I believe we still have it available in our dashboard 2.0, but I want to just, oh, and I see Beth giving the thumbs up. So yes, President Muldrow, that is definitely something that we can look into. It would be great at some point to talk more about what we've learned about middle school GPA, and also the importance of understanding GPA at middle school at a future time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Beth, for your willingness to get that info on GPAs, because I think it'd be very helpful to see how, you know, the difference between a kid's long-term work and progress and kind of a snapshot test and how that shows up. My next question is, I really appreciate the slide that says, you know, our fifth graders are doing about 10 minutes of assessment per year. However, the slide also says that our 8th grade English language learners are spending an enormous amount of time doing testing. And, you know, research has said over and over again for years now that exposing kids to a lot of high stakes testing is damaging to their self-esteem, is damaging to their relationship with school, with their relationship with their ability level. So I'm curious what we're hoping to do to reduce that for our students who are participating in, you know, more than 10 hours of testing a year, and also what is kind of a healthy average that we want to be at. So we've got our lowest and our highest, but for the majority of students who are not in 5th grade or not in 8th grade ELL, how much time do we want kids to spend doing assessments versus playing or participating and learning in other ways?
So I could start, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Racine Gillis. I think one of the most important things, I don't have a full answer for you, but I'll just state a few things and I'll turn it over to my colleague who probably can answer this much better. I think one is important to note is there are some requirements, right, that we're held to in terms of state and federal requirements. And then second, I would say, I think what is so important is about how useful is that data and how we're using that data to inform and adjust our instruction is the important question behind kind of the amount of time. I don't have an answer for the amount of time, but I think if the information we are gathering as teachers and the information we are using to improve student learning and student outcomes, if it's valuable, then to me it's worth the time. But I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Racine Gillis to see if she can provide more substantive answers.
I don't know that I have more substantive answers, but I think, yeah, the issue is with state and federally mandated assessments. You know, again, 8th grade is our highest, you know, like the most tested. And then Ollie, to your point, the adding on of English language learners and right. So it's like assessment for all and then the assessment for some, and then that gets added on for some, which there's really not a good answer around that. We have done what we can do in terms of minimizing our end. I think there is interest and need for 8th graders going into 9th graders or 9th grade or in high school who want to get the seal of biliteracy, so understanding that language proficiency as they're moving into high school is extremely important to give them the information about where they are in that. I will say nationally, testing averages are about 3 to 4%. So we're sitting at about 1.11% with that 8th grade. So again, the information that we receive from the assessments and how meaningful it is and how we use it and how it's used with students and families, I think is super critical. And, we owe it to them to use that in the most judicious way and best way possible.
I don't think that necessarily got to the answer I'm looking for in terms of what is the average for our students who are not in 8th grade or 5th grade, or what is it that we aspire to in terms of how much time we want our students to spend. But what I will say is this, I think if adults find something useful or helpful, making sure that we are using it to the best possible extent, that feels very subjective, right? Like just saying like, well, as long as we're using it well, then it's worth it to make kids take tests that can be damaging to them. And so I want to push back on that portion of what I'm hearing you all say. We've heard from students for years now that high stakes texting feels really hard, is not something students look forward to or enjoy in school, and can take away from learning. And so I guess if you're saying what makes this worthwhile is how we're using the information we gather from this assessment, I'm curious then, what is the great thing that's come out of years and years of assessments and testing?
So what I was saying about 8th grade is we don't have wiggle room. So we have state and federally mandated assessments that are long, and so that accounts for the time. We do have the commitment with our referendum with the language proficiency assessment, so that's there. In terms of what our benchmark is, we've talked about reducing time so kids aren't experiencing like undue amounts of assessment, and we have really gotten that down to be less than 1 hour per month, many minutes less sometimes depending on the grade level. So I don't know if any of my other colleagues want to answer those questions.
I can give a little bit of a school perspective of how we've used assessments, if that's helpful. So really leaning in on data culture in a way that uplifts who the children are as humans, as learners, those relationship piece, that's important to that work too. But then looking at the data, right? Whether it's formative, screener, whatever, but that we're looking at multiple pieces of data for individual students, and then creating action plans that are personalized. So, teachers can pull small groups of students to provide targeted instruction. That's one, way that, data has been used in schools to move student learning and really having teachers reflect on how they adjust their instruction based on the data.
Excuse me, Chair, I just wanted to point out that's Dr. Anu Ebi, the principal of the year last year, now the new associate superintendent, deputy associate superintendent for middle schools. Just wanted to point that out to everybody.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you so much. That's it for my questions, Board Member Castro.
Thank you. Board Member Gomez-Schmidt Board Member Nichols followed by Board Member Gomez-Schmidt.
All right. I have two questions. Let me just start with the first one that I hope will be easier to answer. So when you had the visual up that started with the colored dots, and there were many, many short cycles for the formative assessments. And I believe you were saying like that's where the premium is, right? Like how teachers are using those short cycle formative assessments to really understand where students are in the classroom. So my first question related to that is, are those teacher designed formative assessments, district provided, a combination? And can you also just help paint a picture a little bit about how teachers themselves are supported or collaborating to understand what their formative assessments are showing?
Yeah, I will start, and I will also not only lean on Dr. Racine Gillis, but our associate superintendents of schools to chime in. Those could be anything from what we call an exit slip, right? Where at the end of the class, you ask students to jot something down about what they learned today, or their most salient moment, or what they have a question about, right? And we call those an exit slip. It could also be things that we call checks for understanding, where a teacher is literally walking around the classroom, checking in to see how students are doing and knowing if they need to do an in the moment adjustment into instruction, or how an individual student may be understanding the learning for that day. So they range. They are definitely teacher developed, teacher directed. We have guidance for teachers that provide ideas and or examples of what those look like. And many times our teacher teams come together and they may plan a common formative assessment, right, for a lesson that they did. And then they may use that data to come back together in their kind of teacher team collaboration to analyze that information, to hear from each other, one, in terms of how that lesson went, where they might have done well, or where they may need to do a reteaching moment. And this is where sometimes in saying the same thing based on this very short, quick, down and dirty assessment. So that is a little bit, it says my internet is unstable, sorry. Hopefully you can hear me. Could you give me a thumbs up, Board Member Nichols? Can you hear me still?
Yes,
okay, perfect.
You did go out for just a second, but you're back.
Okay, perfect. So that is an example, and I will pause to see if my colleagues want to add anything to that.
I'm good with that response, actually. So most of what I'm hearing you say are the short cycle formative assessments are mostly teacher designed. And okay, so then going up one level to the interim instructional assessments, are those Are those more of the, I'm sorry, the kind of district provided assessments?
So
Or-
I think,
or does that one vary as well?
I think that varies. I think at elementary with our new materials that we have, the materials provide a wealth of assessments throughout. Many of those assessments are actually part of the instructional design. They are performance tasks. They are a lesson, but they are kind of a way to capture how students are progressing. At the secondary level, that also varies. I think some teacher teams create common interims, and it depends on which kind of discipline and subject area, but it does vary across levels in terms of whether it's teacher created. It could be a common unit assessment, right? You might remember where teachers have had a kind of unit assessment or a writing on demand assessment, where that may be common, where it also may be individualized.
Okay, thank you. I was just trying to get a better sense of how much teachers in the classroom are kind of using their own brilliance to figure out kind of their assessment for teaching and learning versus how much time a teacher may have to balance using something kind of provided by the district. Not that that's a negative, just trying to figure out the balance of that. So I think I've got a better understanding.
I would
Okay,
just
so
say, can I just say one thing? I'm so sorry, but I would just say that I think this is where the power of planning and teacher teaming structures come into play, because that is where a lot of their dialogue comes in and where they do kind of put their collective brilliance together to think about where how some of those assessments come to life. Sorry, I just wanted to add that one piece.
No, that's great. I mean, for some reason, I had a distinctly different impression that perhaps some of the teacher agency around designing and using their own assessments had started to dissipate, but perhaps I might be confusing things. So, you know, it might have been tied more around some of the, maybe I'm thinking of letters, but anyway, you've described it well enough for now. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Let me just put a pin on that one for now. I'm going to move on to my next question, which is in the visual, it's slide 37, at least in the deck that I have. It shows a flow chart of like after the universal screening, a student may be at low risk, some risk, or high risk. And if they're in kind of the higher risk category, there's some other frequency of kind of monitoring. Is that correct? I'm reading that flow chart right? Okay, cool. So I'm gonna ask a question, and it may not be fair to put these two things together, but at our last regular board meeting in July, we approved the newly named Students on Track to Graduate plan, replacing the former at-risk plan. And we talk a lot in that plan about the strength of our multi-tier systems of support, assessment being a component of that, knowing where our young people are. And so I guess what I'm trying to figure out, and again, if these two things don't go together, we can save this for a different conversation. But if a student comes in this fall, they take a universal screener and they're at the some or high risk, and perhaps they have another kind of life circumstance that now gives them the two criteria per our state statute. Would they be identified to be on the on track to graduate plan, and then they're getting more frequent monitoring, and then perhaps one of those things improves? And I'm I'm trying to think of another way to frame the question. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how do our assessments, or do our assessments better help us understand the students who need the multi-tiered levels of support, that we're not getting to the end of the year and seeing data results that show 69% of our Black students graduating. I mean, I know they're not all connected, but I'm just trying to better understand how our assessments help us better identify our students who really need the kind of support to be on track. And yeah.
I appreciate that, Board Member Nichols. I think it is connected. And let me just try to answer. So if you'll remember our On Track to Graduation plan, that looks at those indicators or the criteria you're talking about. And often those are lagging indicators. So they're like the summative assessments that we don't get till the end of the year, and they're for the whole past year. So that's why it's lagging. So to your point, having a universal screener in place is one of the things that we can do right away to understand and pinpoint the difficulties within skills. And so we can use that screener with additional diagnostic data to really understand and match student intervention and supports to student need. So that allows us to be quicker and respond to our data in a more, targeted way. And also the screening data is really sensitive to change over short periods of time. So we don't have to wait till the end of the year to know if they're making changes in their skills in terms of their rate of improvement. We can set ambitious goals based on the use of the screener and our diagnostic data. So I think you highlight and point out the fact of how our assessment system is working together to be able to intervene, support, provide additional challenge earlier versus waiting. One of the other things I do want to point out that the risk language is not ideal, but that is from a test perspective and how the predictive validity and how description of those resulting results are described. So that is not something that we, I just wanted to put that in according to our actual assessment data platforms. But that's basically just saying, if you are at high risk, if teacher teams, if school teams, if we don't do anything to wrap around the student, the likelihood that that student meets the year-end benchmarks is low. So did that answer your question?
Yes, and I appreciate the fact that you are calling out that the data that we're using for the Students on Track to Graduate plan is kind of like lagging data from the year before. We're using this assessment calendar and system kind of current state as students are coming back in for the fall, right? Yeah, which opens up one more question, and then I will I'll waive the rest of my time. But our assessment calendar, I understand, follows a school year, September through May. And yet we have many students who do end up being identified for summer semester and actually attend summer semester. So I have this curiosity, and again, maybe this is about how we're seeing students more holistically through data. But in some ways, if I was a student just back in June that got identified for summer semester, I did my 6 weeks in summer semester, and then I'm coming back September 1, and you screen me. In some ways, it would be nice to see how does that look for a group of students that have had summer semester, how they look on their fall screener, and what their potential growth looks like over the course of a year. This is not really, I don't know that this is for you, Dr. Racine Gillis. It's just more, I'm just trying to think about, how we see our students outside of the September to May timeline and see them more holistically. But my head is swirling on a bunch of other stuff that isn't necessarily connected to your presentation. So I'll stop there. But thank you for answering my question.
Summer semester does provide us a great opportunity to really work strategically with our students who are enrolled and attending. Teachers do a very nice job of goal setting with students. Having some agency around what those assessments mean. So there's a little bit, it's some extended time to do some extended work with our sometimes most vulnerable students. And so we definitely don't want to just, again, assess them to assess. And so we're very strategic and thoughtful about that process within summer semester.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And my point wasn't necessarily how often or what you're doing as assessment in summer school. It's more about how well do we really know our students? How well do we know the 5th grader that just got asked to go to summer school, who then did their 6 weeks, their family got them there, they finished it, and then they show up in September and they have a screener. And how well do we know that the investment of time and energy and resources that, do you know what I mean, that are kind of wrapped around our students when it starts to work, and when it isn't, what else might we be trying to figure out? That was more my point, but I appreciate you clarifying that you don't over-assess.
Agreed, and the communication, semester. Right? The communication that happens to that next receiving level of the student.
Yes, because I'll say this just as a parent. You all who've known me at Mmsd probably know this. There is nothing more frustrating than seeing your children year after year after year going to summer school, going to school all year long, they're being assessed, you're getting results back, and at some point you start to feel like, my kids keep coming to school and I'm trying to do all the things and I'm trying to encourage and emphasize to my children how important this education is, but the results don't change. There's nothing more frustrating than that. Not because you're trying to base your children's worth on a test score, but you're seeing it as an indicator of how they're learning, right? And so, again, this isn't directed to you, Dr. Racine Gillis. I'm just trying to think about, how and when do we know better about what's working for our young people? I don't think that's all in an assessment calendar, but I think if we're assessing, daggone it, we ought to know something. Okay, anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Remember Gomez-Schmidt.
Thank you, Board Member Castro. And this question that I'm going to ask may be building a little bit on what Nichelle is trying to get at here with what our assessments are really doing. I keep thinking we've had this discussion before about assessment time and wanting to reduce assessment time. But to me, I keep thinking about it in flipping the question and really looking at which assessments do we need to use at each grade level and in each subject to determine if the instruction that we're providing students is effective. And I think, Cindy, you talked to this a little bit when that question was asked earlier. And, the question is can we use the assessments to tell if we're effectively helping each student grow in their learning each year from where they start? We get caught up in this, proficiency, not proficiency cycle. Are the students growing? Are they making progress? And, if we want them to reach that goal, what do we have to have in place every year? Not starting new every year, but from a cycle of kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade, what do we need to have in place to decide if what we are doing instructionally is working? And I guess, you know, you said that you provided some information earlier about the assessment cycle. I guess one of the questions I have for us as we're talking assessment, which assessments are required by federal and state law, and which of our assessments add to our understanding of how our instruction is working? So the question I'm going to have for you is that over the years, the board's been asked to approve new assessments or curricula that have assessments within them. And I'm going to use Achieve 3000 as an example. That has been a relatively new assessment for us. My question is how do we know Achieve 3000 itself is serving its purpose? And I'm wondering how we figure that out before we're asked to approve another cycle of it, right? Is it the best assessment that's out there for what we're measuring? And how do we evaluate kind of the assessments we're using and if they're the most effective ones that we should be using?
So I can start, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kaylee Jackson to talk more specifically about literacy. Achieve 3000 is an assessment that we started to use last year. It was the first time we had a common literacy screener in the district. We hadn't had one for many years. And so we chose that one through a process and worked with our schools this upcoming school year to determine that we wanted to stick with that for next year. From the school perspective, in terms of the assessment, not the resource, because I just want to remind everybody that Achieve has two kind of components to it, right? A classroom resource and an assessment piece. That level set or that screener, from what we heard from our staff, was that gave them very important data in terms about how to differentiate in the classroom and how to think about their instructional delivery for the varied literacy levels in their classroom. So that's just a little bit high level in terms of kind of that, but I'll turn it over to Ms. Jackson to see if she wants to add anything more specific to your question, Board Member Gomez-Schmidt.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ms. Green. Board Member Gomez-Schmidt, I think with Achieve 3000 in particular, Cindy really hit the nail on the head there, where there's a difference between the assessment portion of it, right, which is a screener, which gives our teachers actionable data that they actually have requested to continue to receive from Achieve. And then there is the platform itself that has the articles and the reading and the questions that go alongside it. I think your question about how do we know if assessments themselves, right, are the right assessments is a really good one. And I would say from an instructional standpoint, it's more about the systems that we are using, both in central office and within our buildings, to respond to the data of the assessments than it is the assessments themselves, right? We are not short on data. I think that is clear. And I think that is a common theme that we've been hearing over the past few years when we talk about assessments. And what also is true is that the magic and the increases in growth and understanding doesn't come from just having the data. It comes from responding to it, and it comes from the systems, right, that we have in place and that we support our leaders and our teachers to be able to respond to that. So some of our work this year, right, is putting those systems back in place. I know the associate superintendents, for example, are putting back into place the quarterly reviews of progress, right? That is a system by which we examine and respond to data, not only at the central office level, but also at the building level. So I'll pause there and see if there are any clarifying questions.
No, that makes sense. And giving, you know, how, whatever data we have, like you said, it's only as useful as how it gets used at the school level to inform instruction. And so do we have more time worked into the schedule this year for teachers and school-based teams to really wrap their heads around how they're going to be using the information that we have to do a better job this year? Or to just increase everybody's skills and understandings of what information we have and how we can use that to make instruction effective for students?
Well, time is a hot commodity, for sure, right? And it's hard for us to create more time. But what I can say is that we have been incredibly intentional around what we spend our time doing. And from the teaching and learning side of the house, we are super intentional to support not only our principals, but also our coaches in that data routine and being very intentional on the data that we are looking at, right? So with our focus on early literacy and beyond, our focus is literacy data and data cycles and responding to that at the building level. So yes, we are being very intentional with that this year. And I can't wait to talk literacy all year.
All right. And I would just say, let's not forget about the math along the way.
That too.
Yeah. Oh, no. And I just want to circle back to what Board Member Castro said at the beginning, that remembering that, you know, with each data point, it's connected to a student, and it doesn't always give us the full the full picture, and figuring out those ways to really look at our students in a different way and round out that picture and give encouragement for every student, no matter where you're at, no matter where you're starting. We are here to help you learn, and we believe that you can learn. I mean, we have to get around this cycle of people feeling like they can't, or they've been told that they don't belong. So just looking forward to figuring out how we can, encourage that going forward.
All right, that seems to be it. I apologize. There's some drilling going on in the background if you hear that. But that concludes our final agenda item. Jesse, if you can bring up the last slide, just have a preview for next month. Thank you.
One more.
Yep. So preview for September, wellness check, launching the school year plan. And included in this, we'll have a conversation about cell phones and technology in schools, co-curriculars in the arts update, and what we learned with the Summer Arts Academy. Having said that, may I please get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Okay. Lavinia, your advisory vote?
Yes.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.